The mop hit the floor the same moment Tyler Kane's body did, but only one made the sound of shattered ego meeting cold reality. In a Portland dojo where rank meant everything and respect meant nothing, a quiet janitor named Ethan Cross had just done the impossible. He'd humbled a bully with a single palm strike that looked more like mercy than violence. But what the room didn't know, what Tyler's smirking students were about to discover through frantic phone searches and disbelieving whispers, was that the man mopping their floors was a ghost, not dead. Worse, forgotten. A legend who'd walked away from glory 20 years ago and buried his past under minimum wage and single-father exhaustion. This is the story of what happens when you push the wrong quiet man too far. If you want to see how respect gets taught the hard way, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it started. One Thursday night, one bully, and one janitor who was about to remind everyone that some skills don't fade, they just wait. The industrial cleaner smelled like fake pine and broken promises, the kind of scent that clung to Ethan Cross's hands no matter how many times he washed them. He pushed the yellow mop bucket across the dojo's wooden floor with the steady rhythm of a man who'd learned that invisibility was a survival skill. Thursday nights were always the worst. The advanced class ran late, which meant Tyler Kane ran his mouth even later, and Ethan's daughter Piper would already be asleep by the time he got home to their cramped apartment. He didn't mind the work. Honest labor never bothered him. What bothered him was the voice. "Come on, Marcus, you call that a roundhouse?" Tyler's sharp bark echoed off the mirrors lining the east wall. "My grandmother kicks harder than that, and she's been dead for 6 years." Laughter rippled through the dozen students lined up in their crisp white GIs. Black belts knotted at their waists like emblems of earned cruelty. Ethan kept his head down, pushing the mop toward the corner where the heavy bags hung like silent witnesses. He'd worked at Iron Will Martial Arts for 8 months now, ever since the warehouse job had dried up and Piper's medical bills had piled up like accusations. The dojo occupied the ground floor of a converted textile factory in Portland's Pearl District, all exposed brick and steel beams, the kind of place that charged $200 a month for membership and made you feel like you were training in an authentic temple instead of what used to be a sweatshop. During the day, kids in colorful belts practiced kata and giggled through warm-ups. At night, Tyler Kane's elite warriors, his words, not Ethan's, came to prove themselves, or get broken trying. "Ethan!" Tyler's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Ethan paused mid-stroke, the mop head making a soft squeaking sound against the hardwood. He didn't turn around. Not yet. He knew that tone, the one that said Tyler had decided his night wasn't complete without establishing dominance over the help. "Ethan Cross, our resident man of mystery." Tyler's footsteps approached, bare feet slapping against the floor with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been challenged. "You know what I've been wondering?" Ethan turned slowly, keeping his face neutral, his eyes low. Tyler stood 5 feet away, sweat still gleaming on his forehead from the workout, his black belt cinched tight around his lean waist. 28 years old and already owner of 3 dojos across Portland, Tyler Kane had built an empire on aggressive marketing and even more aggressive teaching methods. His Instagram had 70,000 followers who watched him break boards, spar with visitors, and post motivational quotes over sunsets he'd never actually photographed himself. "What's that, Mr. Kane?" Ethan's voice came out flat, practiced, the voice of a man who'd learned to make himself small. "I've been wondering what a guy like you," Tyler gestured at Ethan's janitor's uniform, the blue shirt with Iron Will Maintenance embroidered over the pocket, "knows about martial arts. You're here every night, cleaning up after real fighters. You watch us train. You must have picked up something, right?" The students had stopped their cool-down stretches. Ethan could feel their attention shift toward him like sharks sensing blood in the water. This was entertainment for them, watching their instructor toy with the janitor, a break from the monotony of forms and sparring drills. "I don't know much," Ethan said. "Just here to clean." "Don't be modest." Tyler's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, show us what you've got. One quick sparring session. Think of it as employee enrichment." "I'd rather not." "I'd rather not," Tyler mimicked in a high-pitched voice that sent snickers through the group. "What are you, scared? It's just for fun, educational purposes. Marcus here." He gestured to a stocky student with a perpetually worried expression. Could use a demonstration on what happens when someone with no training steps into the ring. Right, Marcus? Marcus nodded quickly, though his eyes said he wanted to be anywhere else. Ethan tightened his grip on the mop handle. Mr. Kane, I really need to finish cleaning. My daughter's expecting me home. Your daughter. Tyler's eyebrows rose. Right, the single dad story. That's sweet, Ethan, really. But see, here's the thing. You work for me. And when I ask you to do something, you do it. Consider it part of your job description. Unless you'd rather start looking for work elsewhere. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a doused fire. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came whenever someone backed him into a corner. He thought about Piper, asleep in her twin bed decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars, her medical alert bracelet on the nightstand next to her inhaler. Thought about the stack of bills rubber-banded together in the kitchen drawer. Thought about how many job applications he'd filled out before Iron Will had taken a chance on a 42-year-old man with gaps in his resume that he couldn't explain. Okay, Ethan said quietly. He leaned the mop against the wall. Tyler's grin widened. There we go. That's the spirit. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to break our janitor. Then who'd clean up the blood? More laughter. Ethan pulled off his work shirt, revealing a faded gray t-shirt underneath. He'd been lean once, athletic. Now he was just thin in the way that manual labor and skipped meals made a person thin. But his shoulders still held their shape, and when he rolled them back, something in his posture changed. Imperceptible to most, but there nonetheless. The students formed a loose circle around the sparring area, an unmarked square in the center of the dojo floor. Tyler bounced on his toes, shaking out his arms, playing to his audience. Ethan simply stood, hands at his sides, breathing steady. All right, here's how this works, Tyler announced. Light contact, nothing too serious. I'll throw some combinations. You try to defend. And we'll all learn something about the importance of proper training. Sound good? Before Ethan could respond, a voice cut through the room. This is bullying. Everyone turned. A young woman stood near the edge of the circle, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and an expression that mixed anger with disgust. Her GI bore a blue belt, intermediate level, which meant she'd been training for at least 2 years but wasn't part of Tyler's inner circle. Tyler's smile faltered for half a second. Excuse me, Maya? I said this is bullying. Well, Maya O'Connell, Ethan had seen her name on the membership board, crossed her arms. You're using your position as an instructor to humiliate an employee. That's not teaching. That's ego. The room went quiet. Nobody talked to Tyler Kane like that. His Instagram might have been full of motivational speeches about discipline and respect, but inside his dojos, his word was law. Tyler's jaw tightened. Maya, when you've earned your black belt and opened your own school, you can have opinions about my teaching methods. Until then, maybe focus on perfecting your kata instead of running your mouth. My kata's fine, but I'm also getting a master's degree in organizational psychology, and I'm writing my thesis on abuse of authority in athletic settings. So yeah, I've got opinions, and they're educated ones. A flush crept up Tyler's neck. Then maybe you'd like to demonstrate proper sparring technique since you're such an expert on authority? I'd rather not participate in whatever this is. That's what I thought. Tyler turned back to Ethan, his movements sharper now, his pride wounded. All right, let's do this. Ethan, you ready? Ethan glanced at Maya, who gave him an apologetic look that said, I tried. Then he looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and saw what he'd seen 1,000 times before in 1,000 different men. Someone who'd confused skill with wisdom, rank with respect, and thought that being good at hurting people made him powerful. I'm ready, Ethan said. Tyler didn't bow, didn't touch gloves or show any of the traditional respect that martial arts was supposed to instill. He just launched forward with a quick jab-cross combination aimed at Ethan's face, fast, clean, the kind of strikes that came from years of practice. Ethan's head moved 6 inches to the left. The punches passed through empty air. Tyler reset, threw a low kick toward Ethan's lead leg. Ethan lifted his foot a fraction of a second before impact, let the kick whisper past, then set it down in exactly the same spot. Come on, Ethan, don't just dodge. Tyler's voice had an edge now. Show us what you've got. He came in harder, A combination that started high and finished low, mixing punches and kicks in a pattern designed to overwhelm someone untrained. Ethan moved like water, like shadow, his body making tiny adjustments that took him out of danger's path without any wasted motion. He didn't block, didn't counter, just existed half a second ahead of where Tyler's strikes landed. The room had gone silent. The students weren't laughing anymore. Tyler stepped back, breathing harder than he should have been after such a brief exchange. Sweat dripped down his temple. "You've trained before." "A long time ago," Ethan said. His voice was calm, too calm. "Then stop playing around and actually spar." "I don't want to spar, Mr. Kane. I just want to finish cleaning and go home to my daughter." Something in Tyler snapped. Maybe it was the embarrassment of whiffing on every strike. Maybe it was Maya's words still echoing in his head. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in Ethan's refusal that made Tyler feel small. Whatever it was, he lunged forward with a wild hook punch that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with ego. Ethan moved, not away, not back, inside. He slipped the punch and pivoted, his feet finding the angles that Tyler's didn't know existed. His right hand came up, not in a fist but an open palm, and pressed against Tyler's chest with what looked like no force at all. Tyler Kane flew backward like he'd been shot from a cannon. He hit the floor hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs with a sound like a punctured tire. He slid another 3 feet before stopping, sprawled on his back, staring at the ceiling with the stunned expression of a man whose understanding of reality had just been thoroughly revised. The student stood frozen. Someone's water bottle fell to the floor with a hollow plastic clatter. Ethan lowered his hand slowly, his breathing still steady, his expression unchanged. He looked down at Tyler with something that might have been pity or might have been exhaustion. It was hard to tell. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Tyler coughed, rolled to his side. His face had gone from flushed to pale. What the hell was that?" "Nothing," Ethan said. "Just structure and timing. You came in off balance." "Nobody moves like that." Tyler struggled to his feet, pride and confusion warring on his face. "Nobody just... Who are you?" Before Ethan could answer, Maya's voice came from behind her phone screen, where her thumbs had been flying across the keyboard. "Oh my God!" Everyone turned. Maya's face had gone white. She held up her phone, showing a Wikipedia page with a photo of a younger Ethan, maybe 22 years old, lean and hungry-looking, holding a golden belt above his head in a fighting cage. "Ethan Cross," and Maya read aloud, her voice shaking. "Known as the Ghost, undefeated mixed martial arts champion from 2003 to 2005. 38 professional fights, 38 wins, 29 by knockout. Considered one of the most technical strikers of his generation until his sudden retirement after..." She stopped, reading ahead silently, her eyes going wider. "After a training accident that killed his sparring partner and best friend, David Chen, in 2005. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan closed his eyes. Tyler pulled himself fully upright, staring at Ethan like he was seeing a stranger. You were the Ghost?" "Was," Ethan said quietly. "That was 20 years ago. Different life." 20 years? Tyler's voice cracked. "You don't just lose that kind of..." He gestured helplessly at the space where Ethan had moved, where he'd made a black belt instructor look like an amateur with a single palm strike. "That doesn't just go away." "I tried to make it go away." Ethan picked up his work shirt from where he'd left it draped over his mop bucket. "Didn't work, obviously, but I did try." Maya set down her phone with trembling hands. "Your friend... The article says you were training for a title defense. He was helping you prepare. You threw a combination that... I know what I threw." Ethan's voice carried a weight that silenced her instantly. "I was there. I'm there every night when I close my eyes." He pulled the shirt on, fingers working the buttons with mechanical precision. The students watched him like he was a bomb that might detonate. Tyler just stood there, his carefully constructed identity as the alpha instructor crumbling like wet cardboard. "Why?" Tyler finally asked. "Why the hell are you mopping floors if you are... Because I killed my best friend with my bare hands." Ethan's voice was flat, factual. Because I spent 6 months in counseling trying to convince myself it was an accident. Because every time I threw a punch after that, all I could see was David's face. Because I have a daughter who needs a father more than the world needs another fighter. He picked up the mop. And because somebody has to clean the floors, Mr. Kane, might as well be me. You should be teaching, Maya said softly. Not him. Ethan shook his head. I'm not a teacher. Not anymore. Then what are you? Tyler's question came out desperate, like he needed to categorize Ethan, to file him away somewhere that made sense. Ethan looked at him, really looked at him, and Tyler flinched from what he saw in those eyes. Not anger, not triumph, just a vast, tired sadness that had been there so long it had worn grooves into his soul. I'm a janitor, Ethan said, and I'd like to finish my shift. But the room had changed. The students had changed. The way they looked at Tyler, at Ethan, at the space between them where all their assumptions had been shattered, it was all different now. Marcus, the stocky student, stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Cross? Can I ask you something? It's just Ethan. Ethan, then. That move you did, the palm strike. How did you generate that much power without even winding up? I didn't generate power. I redirected his. But how? Marcus, the janitor needs to clean. Tyler's voice had lost its edge. He sounded like a man trying to reassert control but no longer believing in his authority. Class dismissed. Everyone out. Nobody moved. They were all looking at Ethan. Go home, Ethan said gently. It's late. They went, slowly, reluctantly, collecting their bags and water bottles, throwing glances back at Ethan like he might vanish if they looked away too long. Maya lingered by the door, her phone still in her hand, questions written all over her face. But she left too, finally. And then it was just Ethan and Tyler in the big empty dojo with its mirrors and heavy bags and all the weight of what had just happened. Tyler sank down onto one of the benches that lined the wall. He put his head in his hands. I humiliated you in front of everyone. Yeah. And you could have destroyed me. Yeah. But you didn't. Ethan pushed the mop in slow, methodical strokes. Would have been easy. One punch, maybe two, and you'd have been unconscious before you hit the ground. Then what? I'd feel strong for 5 seconds? Prove something to a room full of people who don't matter to me? Risk my job? Risk going back to that headspace where using violence felt like solving problems? He shook his head. Not worth it. That palm strike wasn't violence. That was a lesson. Violence would have been breaking your ribs. Tyler looked up, his face haggard. What's the difference? Intent. Ethan paused, leaning on the mop handle. I pushed you back because you needed to understand that attacking someone wasn't going to work. I didn't hurt you because hurting you wouldn't have taught you anything except to fear me. And fear isn't respect. You sound like a teacher. I sound like someone who learned hard lessons. Ethan resumed mopping. There's a difference. They were quiet for a long moment. The industrial cleaner smell mixed with sweat and the faint scent of the foam mats stacked in the corner. Outside, Portland's nighttime traffic hummed its perpetual lullaby. My grandfather opened the first Iron Will dojo 40 years ago, Tyler said quietly. He taught me that martial arts was about discipline, respect, honor. Then he died, and I inherited the business, and somewhere along the way I forgot all that. I forgot it was supposed to be about building people up, not tearing them down. He laughed bitterly. Hell of a thing to realize because a janitor put me on my ass. You're not a bad instructor, Ethan said. You've got good technique. I've watched you teach. You know your forms, your combinations. You lead with ego instead of wisdom. And you think that can change? I think everything can change if you're willing to do the work. But it's hard work, Mr. Kane. Harder than learning a spinning back kick or breaking boards for Instagram. It's the work of admitting you were wrong, apologizing to people you've hurt, showing up every day committed to being better than you were yesterday. Ethan looked at him. That work never ends. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm still not done. Tyler stood up slowly. His black belt hung loose around his waist, suddenly looking more like a costume than an achievement. I should apologize to you for what I did tonight. You should. But not because I'm the ghost, or because I embarrassed you. You should apologize because you tried to humiliate someone to make yourself feel powerful. And that's wrong, no matter who they are. If I'd been some random janitor with no training, what you did would have been just as bad. Worse, maybe, because then I couldn't have defended myself. You're right. I know I'm right. Question is whether you believe it. Tyler nodded slowly, like a man waking up from a long sleep. Ethan Cross, the ghost. Jesus. I've watched your fights on YouTube. You were incredible. I was dangerous. There's a difference. Is there? You never lost. You made grown men quit. I killed my best friend. Ethan's voice cut through Tyler's nostalgia like a scalpel. David Chen, we grew up together, started training together when we were 12. He was in my corner for every single fight. He was my best man when I got married. He was the first person I told when my wife was pregnant. And then one Tuesday afternoon, we were drilling combinations in preparation for my next title defense. And I threw a left hook that landed wrong. Wrong angle, wrong timing, wrong everything. Caught him on the temple. He went down like someone had cut his strings. The dojo seemed to hold its breath. He died 3 hours later in the hospital. Subdural hematoma. The doctor said it was a freak accident, 1 in a million chance. His parents said they forgave me. My wife said it wasn't my fault. The media called it a tragedy. But none of that changed the fact that I killed the person I loved most in the world because I was so obsessed with winning, so focused on defending a championship belt, that I trained harder than I should have. Pushed when I should have rested. And David paid the price. Tyler's face had gone pale. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just remember it next time you're tempted to make someone spar when they don't want to. Remember that the techniques we teach, the strikes and submissions, and all of it, they're not toys. They're tools that can break bones, rupture organs, end lives. And treating them like entertainment, like ways to boost your ego or impress your students, Ethan shook his head. That's how people get hurt. Is that why you quit? I quit because every time I stepped into a gym after that, all I could smell was the hospital. That antiseptic smell mixed with fear and grief. I quit because my wife left me, said she couldn't watch me destroy myself with guilt. I quit because the championship belt sitting in my apartment felt like a murder weapon. And I quit because I realized that I'd built my entire identity on being able to hurt people better than they could hurt me. And that identity had killed the person who mattered most. Ethan wrung out the mop, the dirty water splashing into the bucket. So I walked away, disappeared, moved across the country, took whatever jobs I could find that didn't involve fighting, tried to be invisible. Then my ex-wife died in a car accident 4 years ago, and suddenly I was a single father to a 6-year-old girl who had asthma and needed someone steady, someone safe, someone who wasn't the ghost. And you've been here ever since? Here, or places like here? Cleaning gyms, fixing things, keeping my head down. Ethan pulled the mop bucket toward the storage closet. It's a small life, Mr. Kane. Probably looks pretty pathetic from the outside. But it's mine, and it's honest, and most importantly, nobody gets hurt. Tyler stood there for a long moment, processing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more genuine. What you said before about the work of being better, will you help me do it? Help you how? Teach me, really teach me. Not techniques, I've got those. But the other stuff, the wisdom part, the part your grandfather tried to teach you that you forgot. Tyler's eyes were earnest now, stripped of their earlier arrogance. I've got 3 dojos full of students who deserve better than what I've been giving them, and I don't know how to fix it alone. Ethan was quiet for a long time. I'm not a teacher. You taught me more in 5 minutes than I learned in 5 years of seminars. That wasn't teaching. That was just existing, being who I am. Isn't that what the best teaching is? The question hung in the air. Ethan thought about Piper, waiting at home, thought about the bills in the kitchen drawer, thought about David Chen, who'd believed martial arts was about building character, not collecting trophies. Thought about what David would say if he could see Ethan now, hiding in plain sight, using his gifts to mop floors instead of mentor people. I need to think about it, Ethan finally said. Fair enough. Tyler pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card. That's my personal number. Call me when you decide. Or don't. Either way, thank you for not destroying me when you could have, and for destroying my ego, which apparently needed it. He left. Ethan stood alone in the empty dojo, the card in his hand, the smell of pine cleaner in his nose, and the ghost of David Chen's smile in his memory. He finished mopping, locked up, walked to his beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, drove through Portland's wet streets toward the apartment where his daughter slept, dreaming whatever 9-year-olds dream about. The whole way, he thought about Maya's words. You should be teaching, not him. When he got home, he crept into Piper's room like he did every night. She was curled under her galaxy print comforter, her nebulizer on the nightstand, her medical alert bracelet glinting in the light from the hallway. She stirred as he bent to kiss her forehead. Dad? Hey, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. How was work? It was interesting. Did you mop the whole dojo? Most of it, she yawned. She bought it. You're the best mopper in the world. Thanks, Piper. Dad? Yeah? Do you ever miss what you used to do before you were a mopper? Ethan froze. They'd never talked about this. He'd kept his past carefully sealed away, letting Piper believe he'd always been just Dad, just a guy who worked odd jobs and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. Where'd that question come from? I heard you talking in your sleep last week. You kept saying sorry to someone named David. His heart clenched. Piper, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but Mom used to say you were someone important before I was born, someone people knew. Her voice was small in the darkness. Was that true? Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. I used to fight, sweetheart. Professional fighting. I was pretty good at it. Like boxing? Sort of. Different styles mixed together. But then something bad happened, and I stopped. Started over. Became a dad. And that's been the most important thing I ever did. More important than fighting? Way more important than fighting. She was quiet for a moment. The kids at school, some of them have dads who are doctors or lawyers or computer programmers. I tell them my dad's a mopper, and they laugh sometimes. Does that bother you? Sometimes. But then I remember that you're always home for dinner, and you never miss when I have an asthma thing, and you know all the words to my favorite songs even though you pretend they're annoying. She reached out, found his hand in the dark. I wouldn't trade you for a fancy dad. Not ever. Ethan's throat tightened. I wouldn't trade you for anything in the world, Piper. Even winning a big fight? Especially not that. She smiled, already drifting back to sleep. Love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. He sat there until her breathing evened out, until he was sure she was fully asleep. Then he went to his own room, barely bigger than a closet, with a futon and a milk crate nightstand, and pulled a box from the top shelf of his closet. Inside was his past. Championship belts, newspaper clippings, photos of a younger Ethan, arm around David Chen's shoulders, both of them grinning like they'd figured out the secret to immortality. Magazine covers that called him the next big thing and unbreakable. A memorial program from David's funeral, the paper yellowed with age. At the bottom of the box was the last thing he'd kept from that life, a photo of him and David in a training gym, both 19 years old, both believing the world was theirs for the taking. David had written on the back in his messy handwriting, "Brothers in the ring, friends in life, nothing can stop us." Ethan traced the words with his finger. 20 years of carrying that photo, that guilt, that weight. 20 years of trying to be small enough that he couldn't hurt anyone. 20 years of running from the person he'd been. Tyler's business card sat on the futon next to him. His phone was in his pocket. Piper was asleep down the hall. The decision was his to make. He thought about Maya calling out Tyler's bullying, about Marcus's eager question regarding technique, about the way those students had looked at him once they knew who he was, not with fear, but with something closer to hope. Like maybe he could teach them something worth knowing. He thought about David, who'd always said that the point of learning to fight was so you knew when not to. And he thought about himself, 42 years old, mopping floors, hiding from a past that had just found him, whether he wanted it to or not. The question wasn't whether his secret was out. It was what he was going to do now that hiding was no longer an option. Ethan put the photo back in the box, but he left the box on his futon instead of returning it to the closet. Then he lay down, staring at the ceiling, and waited for morning to arrive with its demands and decisions and the weight of choices he could no longer avoid. Outside, Portland slept. Inside, the ghost remained awake, haunted by memories of the man he'd been and uncertain about the man he might become. But for the first time in 20 years, that uncertainty felt less like a burden and more like a possibility. Morning came too early, the way it always did when sleep had been more wrestling match than rest. Ethan stood at the stove in their tiny kitchen, flipping pancakes while Piper sat at the fold-out table doing homework she'd forgotten about the night before. The apartment was small enough that he could reach the refrigerator without taking more than 2 steps from the stove, but it was theirs, and the rent was almost manageable. "Dad, what's 7 times 8? 56. Are you sure?" "Pretty sure, kiddo." Piper scribbled the answer, then looked up at him with those dark eyes that were too perceptive for a 9-year-old. "You look tired." "Couldn't sleep." "Were you thinking about David again?" The spatula paused halfway to the pan. He'd opened that door last night, and now Piper was walking through it with the fearless curiosity of someone who didn't yet understand that some doors were better left closed. "Sometimes I think about him, yeah." "What was he like?" Ethan flipped the pancake, watching the batter bubble and brown. "He was funny, made terrible jokes that somehow always made you laugh anyway. He was loyal, the kind of person who'd show up at 3 in the morning if you needed help. And he believed that learning to fight meant you understood when not to." "That's weird. Most people think fighting is about winning." "Most people are wrong." She went back to her homework, but he could feel the questions building behind her eyes. The box was still sitting on his futon in the other room, a Pandora's container of memories he'd kept sealed for a decade. Now Piper knew he'd had another life, and 9-year-olds were like dogs with bones. They didn't let go until they'd extracted every bit of marrow. His phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. He ignored it and slid 2 pancakes onto Piper's plate. It buzzed again, then again. "Somebody really wants to talk to you," Piper said through a mouthful of pancake. Ethan picked up the phone. 3 texts from 3 different numbers. The first was from Maya. "I'm sorry for looking you up and blurting everything out, but you should know, people are talking. Tyler's students posted about last night. It's spreading." The second was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cross, my name is James Kelly. I'm a reporter with the Portland Tribune. I'd love to interview you about your return to the martial arts community. Please call me." The third was from Tyler. "Can we talk? Not about teaching, about damage control. My phone's been ringing since 6 a.m. Ethan set the phone down like it had turned venomous. "Everything okay?" Piper asked. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Eat your breakfast." But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. The careful anonymity he'd built over 2 decades was cracking like ice on a warming lake. He'd known it would happen the moment Maya had pulled up that Wikipedia page, but he'd hoped for more time. A few days at least. Days. Long enough to figure out what to tell Piper, what to tell his boss at Iron Will, what to tell himself about who he was supposed to be now. The phone rang. Tyler's name on the screen. Ethan answered. "It's 7:30 in the morning." "I know. I'm sorry, but this is important. Can you come to the dojo, please? There's a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where I've got 47 messages from students and former students asking if the ghost is really mopping our floors. The kind where my Instagram is blowing up with people calling me a fraud and a bully. The kind where I need help figuring out how to handle this before it destroys everything my grandfather built." Ethan looked at Piper, who was watching him with those 2 smart eyes. "I have to get my daughter to school." "After that, then? Please, Ethan. I know I don't deserve your help after last night, but I'm asking anyway." The desperation in Tyler's voice was real. Ethan had heard that tone before, usually from fighters who'd just realized they were in over their heads and didn't know how to get out. Against his better judgment, he felt something like sympathy. "I'll be there at 9. "Thank you. Really, thank you." Ethan hung up and found Piper staring at him. "You're famous," she said. "I was famous 20 years ago. Different person. But people still know who you are. Some people who care about fighting." She pushed her plate away, half a pancake still sitting there. "Are you going to start fighting again?" "No." "Promise?" The question hit harder than it should have. Ethan crossed to the table and knelt down so they were eye level. Piper, I promise you, I am not going back to fighting. That part of my life is over. Done. What happened last night was it was just me defending myself. That's all. But you were good at it, at fighting. Being good at something doesn't mean you should do it. I'm also pretty good at holding my breath underwater, but that doesn't mean I should become a pearl diver. She smiled a little at that. That's a weird comparison. Yeah, well, I'm tired. My comparisons get weird when I'm tired. He kissed her forehead. Come on, grab your backpack. I don't want you late. They drove to Piper's school in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of early morning routines. Ethan walked her to the gate like he always did, ignoring the looks from other parents who wondered why a 42-year-old man worked as a janitor instead of having a real career. Let them wonder. Their judgment couldn't touch him as long as Piper was happy and healthy. Dad? She paused at the gate, her backpack almost as big as she was. Whatever happens with this famous thing, you're still just my dad, right? Always. Good. She grinned and ran off to join her friends, leaving Ethan standing there with a knot in his chest and the growing certainty that his carefully controlled world was about to spiral in directions he couldn't predict. He drove to Iron Will Martial Arts and found Tyler's BMW already in the parking lot along with 3 other cars he didn't recognize. Not a good sign. The dojo didn't officially open until 10 on Fridays, which meant whoever was inside had been invited specifically. Ethan used his key to enter through the back door. Voices echoed from the main training floor, Tyler's, Maya's, and others he couldn't identify. He stopped in the doorway and took in the scene. Tyler stood near the mirrors, looking like he hadn't slept. Maya sat on one of the benches, her laptop open, her face drawn. 2 other people occupied the space. A woman in her 50s wearing an expensive suit and an expression that said she'd dealt with worse than this before breakfast, and a younger man with a tablet and the desperate energy of someone whose job depended on solving unsolvable problems. They all turned when Ethan entered. Thank God, Tyler said. Ethan, this is Patricia Domingo, my business attorney, and Marcus Chen. No relation to your friend, just an unfortunate coincidence. He handles my social media and marketing. Ethan noticed Marcus flinch at the word unfortunate, but didn't comment. Patricia Domingo stood and extended a hand that could have crushed walnuts. Mr. Cross, I've spent the last hour learning about your rather extraordinary past. It's just Ethan. Ethan, then. We have a situation that requires careful management. May I speak candidly? You're a lawyer. I assume candid is extra. She smiled without warmth. Clever. Yes. Candor is typically billable, but given the circumstances, I'll waive my fee for this initial consultation. Here's the situation. Last night, several of Tyler's students posted videos and photos to social media claiming that the ghost, you, physically confronted Tyler in his own dojo. The posts have been shared extensively. Local martial arts forums are discussing it. A reporter from the Tribune has already called, and Tyler's enrollment numbers have dropped by 11% since midnight. 11%, Marcus said miserably. 43 cancellations and counting. People calling him a fraud. Saying if the real ghost is mopping floors, what does that say about Tyler's teaching? Tyler looked at Ethan with exhausted eyes. I built this on reputation, on the idea that I was the best instructor in Portland, and now everyone knows there was someone better cleaning my toilets. That's not what happened, Maya said sharply. What happened is you bullied an employee and he defended himself with remarkable restraint. If anything, Ethan's the hero of this story. The narrative doesn't matter, Patricia said. What matters is perception and liability. Ethan, did Tyler force you to spar against your will? Strongly encouraged it. Using threats of termination? Ethan hesitated. This was where it got complicated. Tell the truth, and Tyler could face legal consequences. Lie, and he'd be complicit in covering up behavior he'd explicitly called out. He thought about David, who'd always said that honor wasn't about choosing between right and wrong. It was about having the courage to choose right when choosing wrong would be easier. Yes, Ethan said. He threatened my job if I didn't spar with him. Tyler's face went pale. Patricia's expression didn't change, but Marcus made a small sound like he'd been punched. That's constructive discharge, Patricia said. Possibly workplace harassment. If Ethan wanted to pursue legal action, he'd have a strong case. I don't want to pursue legal action, Ethan said. I just want to do my job and go home to my daughter. Unfortunately, that ship has sailed. Patricia gestured to Marcus's tablet, where comments and shares were scrolling past in an endless feed. The story is out. The question now is how we shape it before it shapes us. We could release a statement, Marcus offered weakly, saying it was a misunderstanding, that Ethan and Tyler were just training together and things got blown out of proportion. That's a lie, Maya said flatly. I was there. It wasn't training. It was humiliation, and Ethan stopped it with the minimum force necessary. If you try to spin this as something else, I'll go on record contradicting you. Tyler slumped against the wall. So what do we do? Patricia looked at Ethan with calculating eyes. That depends on what Ethan wants. What I want is to be invisible again. That's not an option anymore. You're the ghost. People are going to come looking. Reporters, fans, other fighters wanting to test themselves against the legend. You can try to hide, but they'll find you. They always do. She paused. Or you can control the narrative yourself. How? By telling your story, on your terms, not through tabloid journalists or gossip forums, but directly. You could do an interview, a press conference, something where you explain why you disappeared and what you've been doing for 20 years. I've been cleaning toilets and raising my daughter, not exactly inspiring content. You've been living with the grief of accidentally killing your best friend while pursuing single parenthood and staying true to your principles, Maya said quietly. That's incredibly inspiring, actually. Ethan shook his head. I'm not interested in being inspiring. I'm interested in keeping my head down and paying my bills. Then you'll spend the next month being harassed by people who won't take no for an answer, Patricia said. Better to give them what they want, one interview, one statement, and then disappear on your terms. The room fell silent. Ethan could feel their eyes on him, all of them wanting something different. Tyler wanted reputation repair. Patricia wanted liability management. Marcus wanted content. Maya wanted justice. And Ethan wanted to rewind 24 hours to when his biggest problem was an overflowing mop bucket. I need to think about it, he finally said. Don't think too long, Patricia advised. Every hour we wait is another hour for the story to get away from us. Ethan turned to leave, but Tyler's voice stopped him. Wait. Before you go, last night, you said I should apologize. Not because you're famous, but because what I did was wrong, regardless of who you are. I remember. You were right. Tyler straightened up, meeting Ethan's eyes with something like courage. Ethan Cross, I apologize for threatening your job. I apologize for trying to humiliate you in front of my students. And I apologize for using my position as your employer to force you into a situation where you had to defend yourself. What I did was wrong. It was abuse of power, and it goes against everything martial arts is supposed to teach. He paused. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air. Ethan could see how much it cost Tyler to say those words in front of his lawyer, his marketing guy, and a student who'd already called him out once. There was no wiggle room in the apology, no deflection or excuses, just acknowledgement and remorse. Thank you, Ethan said. That took guts. I've been thinking about what you said, about doing the work of being better. I want to do that work, but I don't know how. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. My grandfather taught me forms and techniques, but he died before he could teach me the wisdom part. And I've been failing people because of it. The first step is what you just did, admitting you were wrong, taking responsibility. What's the second step? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the box on his futon, about Piper's questions, about the way those students had looked at him once they knew who he was. He thought about David Chen, who'd believed that the strongest people were the ones who used their strength to protect others. And he thought about the fact that hiding was no longer an option. The ghost was out. The question was what kind of ghost he wanted to be. The second step, Ethan said slowly, is changing how you teach. Not the techniques, those are fine, but the culture, the atmosphere. The way you treat students who are struggling or different or don't fit your image of what a martial artist should be. How do I do that? You start by listening, really listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk. You ask students what they need instead of telling them what you think they need. You make the dojo a place where being vulnerable is okay, where asking questions doesn't get you mocked, where making mistakes is part of learning instead of something to be punished. Maya was nodding. Tyler looked overwhelmed. "That's a lot of change," he said. "Being better is always a lot of change. If it was easy, everyone would do it." Ethan moved toward the door. "I'll think about what Patricia said, about the interview, but I need some time." He made it halfway across the parking lot before Maya caught up with him. "Ethan, wait." He turned. She was still in her GI from last night, like she'd come straight here without going home. Her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she said, "for looking you up, for telling everyone. I was angry at Tyler, and I thought exposing who you were would somehow help, but all I did was violate your privacy and make your life harder." "You didn't do anything wrong, Maya. You called out bullying when you saw it. That took courage." "Courage didn't give me the right to out you." "Maybe not, but it's done now. Can't unring that bell." He unlocked his car. "Why are you really here? At 7 in the morning, looking like you haven't slept?" She hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "Because I study abusive authority. That's my whole thesis. How people in positions of power, coaches, teachers, instructors, use that power to harm instead of help. And last night, I watched it happen in real time. Tyler using his position to force you into a situation where you had to either submit to humiliation or risk your livelihood." She took a shaky breath. "But then I watched you handle it with such grace, such restraint. You could have destroyed him, not just physically, but socially, legally, all of it. And you chose not to. You chose to teach instead." "I didn't choose anything. I just reacted." "That reaction is a choice. It's who you are. And Tyler's students saw it. I saw it. That's the kind of instructor people need. Someone who understands that real strength is control, not domination." Ethan leaned against his car, suddenly too tired to stand unsupported. "Maya, I'm not a role model. I'm a guy who killed his best friend and spent 20 years running from it. I mop floors and make pancakes and try to keep my daughter from inheriting my damage. That's the whole story." "That's not the whole story. The whole story includes you walking away from fame and money because you understood the cost. It includes you choosing your daughter over your career. It includes you working minimum wage jobs with dignity instead of trading on a name that could have opened doors." She stepped closer. "Ethan, do you know how rare that is? How many people I've interviewed who couldn't let go of their glory days, who kept chasing the high of being important even when it destroyed them and everyone around them. Being broke isn't noble, Maya. It's just being broke. But staying true to yourself is noble, and that's what you did." He wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was catching up with him. He'd been awake for 26 hours, and the emotional weight of the last evening was pressing down like a physical force. "I need to go," he said. "I have to sleep before my shift tonight." "You're still going to clean the dojo?" "It's my job." "Tyler would understand if you needed time off." "I don't need time off. I need normalcy, routine, something that makes sense." He opened his car door. "Thanks for caring, Maya. Really. But I'm not the person you think I am." "You're exactly the person I think you are. That's the problem. You're the only one who can't see it." She walked back toward the dojo, leaving Ethan standing by his car with her words echoing in his head. He drove home through Friday morning traffic, past coffee shops where people grabbed lattes before heading to offices where they had careers instead of jobs, past gyms where people trained for fun instead of survival, past the ordinary world he'd been trying to inhabit for 2 decades. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from numbers he didn't know, friend requests on social media platforms he'd never joined, emails forwarded from the Tribune reporter who'd somehow gotten his address. The modern world was relentless in its need to categorize, to understand, to turn every story into content. Back at the apartment, he silenced his phone and stood in his closet doorway, looking at the box he'd left on the futon. Piper wouldn't be home for 7 hours. He could put the box away, pretend last night had been an aberration, go to work tonight and mop the floors like always. Or he could open it. Really open it. Look at everything he'd been carrying and decide if it was time to put some of it down. He pulled the box onto his lap and started removing items one by one. Championship belts that weighed more than they should. Newspaper clippings with headlines like, "Ghost Strikes Again," an undefeated phenomenon. Photos of himself at 23, 24, 25, lean and hungry and certain he'd figured out the answer to something important. Photos of David at 19 throwing a kick in a ratty gym, David at 22 holding up a championship belt that wasn't even his, grinning like he'd won it himself. David at 25 standing next to Ethan after the fight that would be Ethan's last, both of them exhausted and victorious, and having no idea that 3 weeks later, everything would end. The memorial program. Ethan unfolded it with careful hands. David's parents had chosen a photo from when David was 18, before the broken nose and scarred knuckles, when he still looked like someone's kid instead of someone's fighter. The service had been held at a Buddhist temple in San Francisco, and Ethan had sat in the back row, unable to breathe, while people who'd known David their whole lives stood up and shared memories. No one had blamed Ethan. That was the worst part. They'd all been so kind, so understanding, so quick to remind him that accidents happen in training, that David had known the risks, that he wouldn't want Ethan to blame himself. But kindness didn't erase guilt. Understanding didn't bring David back. And every day for 20 years, Ethan had woken up in a world where David wasn't, and that was a weight no amount of rationalization could lift. His phone buzzed again despite being silenced. The screen showed Patricia Domingo calling. He ignored it. Then Tyler. Then a number with a California area code that might have been David's parents. He'd lost touch with them years ago, couldn't bear the reminder of what he'd taken from them. The buzzing continued. Ethan turned the phone completely off and lay back on the futon, surrounded by the artifacts of a life he'd lived and left behind. He closed his eyes, intending to rest for just a few minutes. He woke 4 hours later to knocking on his door. For a moment, he didn't move. Maybe whoever it was would go away. The knocking continued, patient and persistent. Ethan dragged himself off the futon and opened the door to find Patricia Domingo standing in his hallway, somehow looking even more professional than she had at the dojo. "How did you get my address?" "I'm a lawyer. Finding people is part of the job description." She held up a briefcase. "May I come in? I have something you need to see." "I don't recall inviting you." "You didn't. But this concerns your daughter, so I thought you'd want to discuss it privately, rather than in a hallway where your neighbors can hear." The mention of Piper cut through his irritation. He stepped aside, letting Patricia enter the small apartment. She took in the space with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of living situation and learned not to judge. "Coffee," Ethan offered, more from habit than hospitality. "No, thank you. I'll be brief." She set her briefcase on the fold-out table and extracted a tablet. "These are the current trending topics in Portland social media." She showed him screenshots, dozens of posts about the ghost, speculation about why he'd disappeared, arguments about whether Tyler Kane was a fraud, and worse, photos of Ethan's apartment building with captions like, "Legend lives here." Ethan's blood went cold. "Someone posted my address?" "Multiple someones, along with your daughter's school, her name, her medical history. Apparently, someone accessed records from her school's database." Patricia's voice was professionally neutral, but her eyes held something like sympathy. "Welcome to the internet, Mr. Cross, where privacy is a quaint notion and everyone's life is content." He sat down heavily. "They posted information about Piper?" "They did. Now, before you panic, I've already contacted the platforms requesting removal under minor privacy laws. Most will comply within 24 hours. But the reality is that once information is out there, it never fully disappears. Screenshots exist, archives exist, and people are very, very interested in the ghost's secret life. I need to get her out of school, take her somewhere safe." "And go where?" "The story is national now. By tomorrow it'll be international. Running will only make you more interesting." Patricia sat across from him. "I understand this is terrifying. I have children myself. But the best way to protect Piper is to control the narrative before someone else does it for you." "You said that earlier. What does it actually mean?" "It means you do one comprehensive interview with a reputable journalist. You tell your story, the real story, not the sensationalized version, and you make it clear that your daughter is off limits. Most legitimate media outlets will respect that boundary once you've established it. The ones that won't respect it will be revealed as tabloid garbage, and their credibility suffers." She pulled up another document on her tablet. I've taken the liberty of contacting several journalists who specialize in long-form sports narratives, people with actual ethics. This one, she highlighted a name, won the Pulitzer for a piece on traumatic brain injury in football. She's thoughtful, fair, and she has a daughter Piper's age. She understands protecting children. Ethan stared at the name on the screen. Sarah Winters, ESPN Features. He'd read her work before years ago. She was good, the kind of writer who found the human story underneath the athletic spectacle. What would I have to tell her? Everything. The fights, the retirement, David Chen, why you disappeared, what you've been doing for 20 years. The whole truth. That's the only way this works. If you're completely honest, people lose interest in digging. There's no mystery left to solve. And if I say no, then journalists with fewer scruples will piece together your story from public records, court documents, and interviews with people who barely knew you. Tyler's students will sell their version to whoever pays. Someone will track down David's parents and ask them how they feel about their son's death 2 decades later. And Piper will find out about your past from classmates who heard it from their parents who read it in a blog post written by someone who thinks accuracy is optional. Patricia's voice softened. I'm not trying to scare you, Ethan. I'm trying to help you understand that silence isn't protection anymore. It's just surrender. He thought about Piper asking if he'd start fighting again. Thought about her small voice saying, "You're still just my dad, right?" Thought about the box of memories on his futon and how much of his past he'd kept sealed because opening it felt like betrayal. Of David's memory, of the peace he'd tried to build, of the person he'd tried to become. But maybe Patricia was right. Maybe the only way forward was through. If I do this interview, I have conditions. Name them. Piper's face never appears in any media. Her school, her medical information, anything that could identify her beyond Ethan Cross has a daughter. That's off limits completely. Agreed. I won't demonstrate techniques or spar for cameras. This isn't a comeback story. It's an ending story. Fair enough. And Tyler Kane isn't the villain. What happened at the dojo was between him and me. I won't let some journalist turn it into a scandal that destroys his business. Patricia raised an eyebrow. That's remarkably generous, considering he threatened your job. He apologized. He's trying to do better. That should count for something. All right. I'll make sure those boundaries are written into the contract before any interview happens. She stood, extending her hand. You're making the right choice, Ethan, for yourself and for Piper. He shook her hand, not entirely sure he believed her, but out of better options. After Patricia left, Ethan sat in his quiet apartment, surrounded by championship belts and old photographs, and wondered if it was possible to move forward while carrying the past, or if eventually you had to choose between the two. His phone powered back on and immediately lit up with notifications. He ignored all of them except one, a text from Tyler with a link to an Instagram video. Against his better judgment, he clicked it. The video showed Tyler sitting in the empty dojo, no dramatic lighting or music, just him and the camera. I want to address what happened last night, Tyler said, his voice steady but humble. I abused my position as an instructor and employer. I tried to humiliate someone to make myself feel powerful, and I was wrong. Ethan Cross handled the situation with more grace than I deserved. He's not returning to fighting. He's not looking for attention. He's just a man trying to live his life and raise his daughter in peace. I'm asking everyone, please respect that, and I'm committing to doing better. Real martial arts isn't about domination or ego. It's about discipline, respect, and using strength to protect people, not harm them. I forgot that. I won't forget it again. The video had 70,000 views in 3 hours. The comments were a mix of respect for Tyler's honesty and continued fascination with Ethan's story, but there was something else too. People sharing their own experiences with abusive instructors, toxic gym cultures, and the difference between real teaching and performance. Ethan watched the video twice, then sent Tyler a text. That took courage. Thank you. The response came immediately. I meant every word. Whatever you need, I'm here. Evening arrived before Ethan was ready for it. He picked up Piper from school, watching her run to the car with her backpack bouncing, and felt the familiar gratitude that she was safe, healthy, his. How was school? He asked. Weird, some of the kids were asking if my dad used to be famous. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did you tell them? I said you were famous for making the best pancakes in Portland. She grinned. They thought I was joking. Piper. It's okay, Dad. I know something's happening. I'm not a baby. She looked at him with those two smart eyes. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. But some people found out about what I used to do before you were born, and they're interested in the story. It might be weird for a little while. Will you have to talk to reporters? Maybe. Probably. Will I? Never. I promise to keep you out of it, and I will. She was quiet for a moment. Dad? The thing you said last night about doing something bad and starting over, about David? Yeah? Was it really an accident? The question hit him like a physical blow. In all his years of therapy, grief counseling, and late-night wrestling with guilt, no one had ever asked him that directly. They'd all assumed, danced around it, offered comfort without confirmation. But Piper just asked. Yes, he said, his voice thick. It was an accident, a terrible, horrible accident that I would give anything to undo. But yes. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Because if it was an accident, that means you didn't mean to hurt him. And if you didn't mean to, then you're not a bad person. You're just a person something bad happened to. Ethan had to pull over. He sat on the side of the road, hands shaking on the steering wheel, while his 9-year-old daughter's wisdom cut through 20 years of self-recrimination. When did you get so smart? He managed. I've always been smart. You just haven't asked me enough questions. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned over to hug him awkwardly across the center console. It's okay to be sad, Dad, but you don't have to be sad forever. He held her and wondered when exactly their roles had reversed, when she'd become the one offering comfort instead of needing it. They drove home, made dinner, did homework, followed their routine because routine was the life raft they both clung to when everything else felt uncertain. And when Piper was finally asleep, her nebulizer humming softly on the nightstand, Ethan sat down and sent an email to Sarah Winters. Ms. Winters, my name is Ethan Cross. You might know me as the Ghost. Patricia Domingo suggested I contact you about doing an interview. I'm ready to tell my story, all of it, but I have conditions regarding my daughter's privacy that are non-negotiable. If you're interested, please let me know. Ethan. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then sat in the dark apartment, surrounded by the past he'd tried to bury and the future he couldn't quite see, and waited for morning to bring whatever came next. Sarah Winters replied at 6 in the morning. Ethan knew this because he'd been awake since 4:30, lying in the dark and listening to the city wake up through his thin apartment walls. The email notification lit up his phone screen like a small beacon in the pre-dawn gloom. Ethan, I'd be honored to tell your story. Your conditions are not only reasonable, they're essential. I have a daughter too. I understand. Can we meet today? I'm flying to Portland this afternoon. Best, Sarah. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, coffee shop near my place. 2 p.m. I'll send the address. By the time Piper woke up, Ethan had already made breakfast, packed her lunch, and mentally rehearsed a dozen different ways to explain why a journalist was flying across the country to interview him. None of them sounded right. How did you tell your 9-year-old that the quiet life you'd built was about to be examined under a microscope by strangers who'd never met you but felt entitled to judge every decision you'd ever made? You're making that face again, Piper said around a mouthful of cereal. What face? The worried face. The one where your eyebrows do that scrunchy thing and you look like you're trying to solve a math problem in your head. I'm meeting with a reporter today. She wants to interview me about my past. Piper set down her spoon, suddenly serious. The fighting past? Yeah. Are you going to tell her about David? The question shouldn't have surprised him. Piper had been sitting with that information for 2 days now, processing it in whatever way 9-year-olds processed grief they hadn't lived through but inherited anyway. I am. She needs to understand why I stopped. Will it make you sad, talking about it? Probably, but sometimes sad things need to be talked about anyway. She considered this, her face thoughtful in the morning light filtering through their kitchen window. Mrs. Patterson says that keeping feelings inside is like keeping a wild animal in a cage. Eventually, it gets out, and when it does, it's angry. Mrs. Patterson sounds like a smart teacher. She is. She also says that people who've been through hard things are stronger because they know they can survive hard things. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed Piper's hand. When did you grow up without asking my permission? I've been working on it gradually. You've just been too busy worrying to notice. He drove her to school, watching her disappear through the gates with her backpack and her wisdom that made him feel like maybe he'd done something right despite all the things he'd done wrong. Then he drove to Iron Will Martial Arts for what was supposed to be a normal Friday morning cleaning shift. The parking lot told him it wouldn't be normal. There were twice as many cars as usual, and through the front windows he could see the training floor packed with people. He considered turning around, going somewhere else until his shift officially started, but Maya was standing by the door looking like she'd been waiting for him. "Before you run," she called out as he approached, "you should know this is actually a good thing." "What's a good thing?" Tyler called an emergency meeting. All instructors, all senior students, some people from his other 2 dojos. He's making changes. "What kind of changes?" "The kind you suggested. Come see." Against his better judgment, Ethan followed her inside. The dojo was full but quiet, 40 or 50 people sitting cross-legged on the mats in a large circle. Tyler stood in the center, and when he saw Ethan, his face flooded with relief. "Thank God. Ethan, I know this isn't your shift yet, but would you mind staying? I think people need to hear from you." "Hear what?" "I'm just the janitor." "You're not just anything," Tyler's voice carried to every corner of the room. "Everyone here has seen the video from Thursday night by now, and they've seen my response. But what they haven't heard is the full story. What they haven't understood is why what I did was wrong, and more importantly, what we're going to do differently going forward." Ethan wanted to leave, wanted to disappear into the supply closet and emerge only when everyone had gone home. But then he saw the faces in that circle, students ranging from teenagers to people in their 60s, all of them looking at him with expressions that mixed curiosity with something that looked like hope. And he thought about David, who'd always said that the hardest part of learning wasn't mastering techniques, but admitting you had something to learn in the first place. "All right," Ethan said quietly. "I'll stay." Tyler gestured to an empty spot in the circle. Ethan sat feeling conspicuous in his janitor's uniform among all the GIs and workout gear. Maya sat beside him, and on his other side was Marcus from the Thursday night class, who gave him a tentative smile. "Let me start with context," Tyler began. 3 nights ago, I used my position as an instructor and employer to force someone into a situation they explicitly said they didn't want to be in. I threatened Ethan's job unless he sparred with me, and I did it publicly to entertain my students and prove my dominance. That's not teaching, that's abuse of power. And Ethan had every right to quit, to sue me, to make my life as difficult as I tried to make his." Tyler's voice was steady but strained. "Instead, he showed me what real strength looks like. He defended himself with the absolute minimum force necessary, and then he tried to go back to mopping floors like nothing had happened. That's discipline. That's control. That's everything I should be teaching, but haven't been." Someone in the circle raised their hand, a woman in her 40s with a green belt. "But you're a black belt. You've been training for 20 years. How could a janitor?" She stopped, looking at Ethan apologetically. "I'm sorry, I don't mean that as an insult." "It's fine," Ethan said. "The question's valid. Tyler has great technique. Under normal circumstances, he'd wipe the floor with most people. But I'm not most people. I spent 15 years training 8 hours a day. I fought professionally at the highest level. And more importantly, Tyler came at me with ego instead of strategy. He wanted to prove something instead of accomplish something. That makes you predictable." "Can you show us?" Marcus asked eagerly. "Not actually fighting, just the principles you're talking about?" Ethan looked at Tyler, who nodded. "If you're willing, I think it would help." But every instinct Ethan had screamed at him to say no, to maintain the boundary between who he'd been and who he was trying to be. But those faces were so earnest, so hungry for something real, and he realized that teaching didn't have to mean becoming the ghost again. It could just mean sharing what he'd learned in the hopes that someone else wouldn't have to learn it the same hard way. "All right, Tyler, come here." They stood in the center of the circle. Ethan could feel the weight of everyone's attention, the phones that were probably recording this, the way his past and present were colliding in real time. "Tyler, throw a punch at me. Half speed, pulled contact." Tyler threw a clean right cross, proper form, shoulders and hips aligned. Ethan moved his head 4 inches to the left. The punch passed through empty air with room to spare. See how much I moved? Most people think dodging means big dramatic motion, but big motion takes time and energy. This, he repeated the dodge in slow motion, is just enough. No wasted movement. Now watch what happens when Tyler punches again. Tyler threw another cross. This time Ethan slipped inside the punch and placed his open palm against Tyler's chest, pressing gently. Tyler stumbled backward off balance. I'm not using strength. I'm using timing and position. Tyler's weight was already moving forward. All I did was redirect it at an angle his body wasn't prepared for. But the key is, I could have hit him here. Ethan touched Tyler's jaw lightly. Or here, his ribs. Or here, his throat. Those targets were all open because he overcommitted, but I chose not to, because the goal wasn't to hurt him. It was to stop the attack and teach a lesson. How do you know where someone's going to be? A young man asked from the circle. You don't know, you read. You watch how they shift their weight, where their eyes focus, how they breathe. Fighting isn't psychic. It's observation combined with thousands of hours of pattern recognition. Ethan stepped back. But here's what I really want you to understand. Technique is important, but it's not the most important thing. Control is. Knowing when to use force and when not to. Understanding that being able to hurt someone doesn't mean you should. That's what separates martial arts from violence. Maya spoke up from the circle. That's what Tyler didn't understand Thursday night. Right, he had the technical ability to hurt me, or thought he did, but he lacked the wisdom to understand that forcing someone to fight is the opposite of what martial arts should teach. It's using power to dominate instead of to protect. Ethan looked around the circle. How many of you have been in a situation where an instructor made you feel small, made you spar when you weren't ready, humiliated you in front of the class? Hands went up. More than half the people in the circle. That's a problem, Ethan said quietly. That's not training, that's trauma disguised as toughness, and it needs to stop. Tyler's face had gone pale. I've done that. To most of you, probably. I thought I was making you stronger. You thought wrong, Maya said bluntly. You were making us scared. There's a difference. An older man with a gray beard and a black belt spoke up. So what do we do differently? How do we teach discipline without being harsh? You start by understanding that discipline isn't obedience. It's self-control. You can teach someone to control their body, their temper, their fear, without breaking their spirit. You do it by setting clear expectations, by praising effort instead of just results, by making your dojo a place where it's safe to be a beginner. Ethan paused. And you do it by never, ever using someone's vulnerability against them. If a student tells you they're scared or unsure or not ready, that's not weakness, that's honesty. And honesty should be rewarded, not punished. The circle was silent. Some people were nodding, others looked uncomfortable like they were reassessing every martial arts class they'd ever taken. Tyler sat down, looking exhausted. I built this business on being the toughest instructor in Portland, on pushing people past their limits. That's what people came here for. Some people came here for that, Maya corrected. Other people came here despite that, because they wanted to learn and had no other options. And a lot of people left because they couldn't handle the culture you created. She's right, Marcus said quietly. I almost quit 6 times. The only reason I stayed was because I'd already paid for a year up front. Other voices chimed in, sharing stories of humiliation, of being mocked for asking questions, of dreading class because they never knew if they'd be the target of Tyler's corrections. Ethan listened to them and thought about every gym he'd trained in, every coach he'd learned from, and how the best ones had all shared the same quality. They made you want to work harder because you respected them, not because you feared them. Tyler listened to it all, his face a mixture of shame and determination. When the stories finally petered out, he stood up. You're right, all of you. I created a toxic culture and called it excellence. I used fear as a motivator and told myself it was discipline. And I'm sorry. He turned to Ethan. You said the work of being better never ends. I'm ready to start that work. But I need help. I need someone who understands the difference between strength and cruelty, between teaching and dominating. Ethan saw where this was going and shook his head. Tyler, I'm not asking you to fight. I'm asking you to teach. Help me rebuild this place into what it should be. Help me become the instructor my students deserve. I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. You've lived the consequences of unchecked violence. You've chosen restraint over revenge. You've raised a daughter while carrying guilt that would have destroyed most people. If that doesn't qualify you to teach character alongside technique, I don't know what does. I have a job. I have responsibilities. So keep your job. Come in a few hours a week, lead seminars on control, on ethics, on everything I'm not good at. Tyler's voice held genuine pleading now. I know I don't deserve your help, but my students do. These people deserve better than what I've been giving them. Ethan looked at the circle of faces, all of them watching him with varying degrees of hope and expectation. He thought about Patricia Domingo's words, that silence wasn't protection anymore. He thought about Piper saying he didn't have to be sad forever. He thought about the box of memories on his futon and how maybe it was time to stop treating his past like a shameful secret and start treating it like what it actually was, experience that could help other people avoid his mistakes. I'll think about it, he finally said, but I need time. I'm doing an interview this afternoon and I need to focus on that first. The interview with Sarah Winters, Maya asked. I saw she was in town. You know her work? Are you kidding? She's one of the best sports journalists alive. If you're going to tell your story, she's exactly the right person. The meeting broke up after that, people filtering out in small groups, their conversations animated and thoughtful. Tyler pulled Ethan aside before he could leave. Thank you for staying, for sharing, for not letting me off easy. I didn't do it for you. I did it for them. Ethan gestured to the departing students. They deserve honest teaching. I know, and I'm going to give it to them. With or without your help, I'm changing how we do things here. But I hope you'll help anyway. Ethan nodded non-committally and headed for the supply closet to start his actual shift. But Maya caught him in the hallway. That was incredible, she said. The way you broke down the principles, the way you connected technique to ethics. That's exactly what my thesis is about. How martial arts can be empowering or destructive depending on how it's taught. Glad I could contribute to your research. It's more than research now, it's personal. Watching you handle Tyler, listening to you explain control and wisdom. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I want to document this. The transformation of this dojo from toxic to healthy. Your role in it. Would you be willing to be interviewed for my thesis? I thought I was already being interviewed today. That's journalism. This is academic. It's different. More in-depth, more focused on the pedagogical aspects. She pulled out her phone, showing him an abstract for her master's thesis. I'm studying how traditional martial arts hierarchies enable abuse, and more importantly, how they can be restructured to promote healthy power dynamics. You're living proof that it's possible. Ethan scanned the abstract, impressed despite himself. Maya wasn't just a student complaining about bad coaching, she was a scholar working to understand and solve systemic problems. Send me your interview questions. I'll see what I can do. Her face lit up. Really? Thank you. This is going to make my thesis so much stronger. Just remember, I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy trying not to make the same mistakes twice. That's what makes you worth studying. Heroes are myths. People learning from their mistakes? That's real. She left him to his cleaning, but the conversation stayed with him as he mopped and wiped down equipment. He'd spent 20 years trying to be invisible, to make himself small enough that he couldn't cast a shadow on anyone else. But Maya was right. Silence about mistakes didn't prevent them from being repeated. Sharing the hard lessons, being honest about the costs of unchecked ego and unexamined power, that was what actually created change. By the time he finished his shift, it was nearly 1:30. He went home, showered, changed into clothes that didn't smell like industrial cleaner, and checked on Piper one more time even though he knew she was still at school. The apartment felt emptier than usual, like it was holding its breath waiting to see what came next. Sarah Winters had suggested a small coffee shop called Anthem 2 blocks from Ethan's apartment. He arrived 10 minutes early and found her already there, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop, a notebook, and 2 cups of coffee. She stood when she saw him, extending her hand. Sarah Winters was maybe 50, with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that held the kind of intelligence that saw through bullshit immediately. "Ethan Cross, thank you for meeting me. Thank you for the coffee." He took the cup she'd bought for him. Black, no sugar, somehow exactly right. They sat. Sarah flipped open her notebook, old school pen and paper alongside her laptop. "Before we start, I want you to know how this works. I'm going to ask you questions. Some will be easy, some will be hard. You can decline to answer anything, and I'll note that in the piece. The article will be fact-checked, and you'll have a chance to review quotes for accuracy, not to change them, but to make sure I heard you correctly. The piece will publish in 2 weeks. My editor has already approved protecting your daughter's identity completely. No photos, no last name, no school information. Fair?" "Fair." "Good. Let's start with the obvious question. Why did the ghost disappear?" Ethan took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. 20 years of silence, and now he was about to break it for a journalist he'd met 30 seconds ago. But Sarah's eyes held no judgment, only patience, and he realized that was her gift, making people feel safe enough to tell the truth. "I killed my best friend," he said simply, "and I couldn't live with being the person who did that." Sarah's pen moved across the paper. "Tell me about David Chen." So Ethan did. He told her about meeting David at 12 years old in a strip mall karate dojo in San Francisco, about how they'd been inseparable from that first class, two skinny kids who'd found something that made sense in a world that mostly didn't, about training together through high school, through their 20s, about David being in Ethan's corner for every professional fight. "He was more than my training partner," Ethan said. He was my brother, the person who knew me better than anyone, including my wife at the time. We had this thing where we'd spar, and halfway through, we'd start laughing because we knew each other's moves so well. It became like a dance we'd done 1,000 times. What happened the day he died? Ethan set down his coffee cup. His hands were steady, but only because he'd had 20 years to practice keeping them that way when talking about this. "I had a title defense coming up. Big money fight, championship belt on the line. David and I were drilling combinations in a private gym. We'd done it 10,000 times before. But that day, I was tired. We'd been training hard for weeks, and I threw a hook that came in at the wrong angle, caught him on the temple. He went down." Ethan's voice stayed flat, factual, the only way he could get through it. "He was unconscious before he hit the mat. Subdural hematoma. He died 3 hours later in the hospital. He never woke up." Sarah's pen had stopped moving. "I'm sorry." Everyone was sorry. His parents, my wife, the doctors, the media. They all said it was an accident, that these things happen in combat sports, that David knew the risks, and they were right. It was an accident. I didn't mean to kill him, but the result was the same. He was dead, and I was the reason. "How did you handle that?" "I didn't. Not well, anyway. I went to his funeral and couldn't speak, went home and couldn't eat. My wife tried to help, but watching her watch me fall apart, she couldn't take it. She left 6 months later. Can't blame her. I was a ghost long before anyone started calling me that as a nickname." "Is that when you retired?" "I announced my retirement 2 weeks after David's funeral. Gave up the championship belt, walked away from a career that was supposed to go another decade. Everyone thought I'd come back eventually. Fighters always do, especially undefeated ones. But I didn't. I worked construction, then warehouse jobs, then maintenance. Moved around a lot. Tried to figure out how to be a person instead of a fighter. Then your ex-wife died, and you became a single father." "Yeah, car accident 4 years ago. Piper was 6. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for myself anymore. I had this little girl who just lost her mother, and she needed someone stable, someone safe, someone who wasn't going to disappear into grief like I'd done before." Ethan met Sarah's eyes. "That's when I really stopped being the ghost. I became dad, and that's a better thing to be." Sarah filled several pages with notes, asking follow-up questions about Piper's health, about the jobs Ethan had worked, about how he'd ended up in Portland. Then she shifted gears. "Let's talk about Thursday night. You're working as a janitor at a martial arts dojo. The instructor forces you to spar with him in front of his students. What was going through your mind?" "Honestly, I just wanted to finish mopping and go home. I didn't want trouble, didn't want attention, but Tyler Kane, he's the instructor. He threatened my job. Said I had to spar or start looking for work elsewhere. And I need that job. I've got medical bills for Piper's asthma, rent, the normal stuff. So I agreed. But you weren't really in danger, were you? You're the ghost. Being the ghost doesn't pay medical bills, and skills fade if you don't use them. I haven't fought in 20 years. For all I knew, Tyler would have taken me apart. But he didn't. No, he came at me with ego, and ego makes you sloppy. I just got out of the way. Then you hit him with a palm strike that sent him flying backward. That was caught on video. It looks superhuman. Ethan almost smiled. It's not superhuman. It's physics and timing. Tyler was already off balance. I just helped him along. You're being modest. I've shown that video to 3 different martial arts experts. They all said the same thing. What you did requires decades of training and perfect control. One called it the most impressive display of restraint he'd ever seen because you could have seriously injured Tyler, but chose not to. That's the point. Fighting isn't about hurting people. It's about controlling the situation with the minimum necessary force. Tyler needed to understand he couldn't bully me, but he didn't need broken ribs to learn that lesson. Sarah made more notes, then looked up with sharper eyes. A student named Maya O'Connell called out Tyler's behavior before you sparred. She's writing a thesis on abuse of authority in martial arts. Did you know that? She told me this morning. She says you're the perfect case study for how to handle power responsibly. How does that feel? Weird. I don't think of myself as responsible. I think of myself as someone who screwed up so badly that I spent 20 years overcompensating. But isn't that responsibility? Understanding the weight of your actions and changing your behavior accordingly? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. Sarah let the silence sit, not pushing, just giving him space to think. Maybe, he finally said. I never thought of it that way. Tyler Kane posted a video apologizing and taking responsibility for his actions. He's also offered you a teaching position. Will you take it? I don't know. Teaching means being visible, being someone people look up to. I'm not sure I'm that person. You're already that person. You just haven't accepted it yet. The interview continued for another hour. Sarah asked about his most memorable fights, about the technical aspects of his training, about what martial arts had taught him beyond just fighting. She asked about Piper, carefully keeping questions general and unidentifying. She asked about his plans for the future, about whether he'd ever consider returning to competition. Never, Ethan said firmly. I'm done fighting. That part of my life is over. But teaching isn't fighting. Teaching is harder than fighting. When you fight, you're only responsible for yourself. When you teach, you're responsible for shaping how other people understand violence, control, discipline. That's a weight I'm not sure I want to carry again. Again? You carried it before? I had students. Early in my career, before I got really successful, kids mostly, teenagers who wanted to learn what I knew. I taught them combinations and footwork, but I didn't teach them wisdom, didn't teach them when not to fight. One of those kids, Marcus Lewis, got into a street fight when he was 17, hurt someone badly because he had the technical skills but not the judgment. The kid he hurt spent 2 months in the hospital. Ethan's jaw tightened. I never taught Marcus after that. Couldn't look at him without seeing my own failure reflected back. You blamed yourself for his choices? I gave him weapons without teaching him when not to use them. Yeah, I blame myself. Sarah closed her notebook, signaling the interview was winding down. Last question, Ethan. If you could go back 20 years and change one thing, what would it be? He didn't hesitate. I'd tell David not to come to practice that day. I'd say I was sick or tired or anything that meant he stayed home safe. But if he'd stayed home that day, he might have died some other way. Car accident, illness, anything. You can't control fate. No, but I can control whether I throw a punch that kills someone I love. And I failed to control that. So David died. That died, and I have to live with it. Ethan stood, suddenly needing to be done with this conversation, this excavation of old pain. Are we finished? We are. Thank you for your honesty. This is going to be a powerful piece. When will it publish? 2 weeks. I'll send you the draft before it goes live. And Ethan? For what it's worth, I think David would be proud of the person you've become. Not the ghost, but the father, the janitor, the man who chose peace over glory. Ethan left the coffee shop without responding because he didn't trust his voice. Sarah's words echoed in his head the whole walk home. Would David be proud? Or would he be disappointed that Ethan had wasted 20 years hiding instead of honoring his memory by becoming the teacher David had always believed he could be? Piper was waiting when he got home, having walked from school with a neighbor kid like she did on days Ethan couldn't pick her up. She took one look at his face and said, "Bad interview?" "Honest interview. Sometimes those feel worse." "Did you tell her about David?" "Yeah." "Did it help talking about it?" Ethan hung up his jacket, considering the question seriously. Had it helped? He'd told the story of David's death hundreds of times, to therapists, to himself at 3 a.m., to the empty air of apartments where no one could hear him. But this was different. Sarah had listened without trying to absolve him, without offering false comfort, and somehow that made the telling feel more real. "Maybe," he said. "I think it helped more than it hurt." "Good. Because you're getting really good at the sad but dealing with it face, and I prefer that to the sad and hiding from it face." "When did you become a therapist?" "I've been working on it gradually. You've just been too busy being sad to notice." She said it with such gentle humor that Ethan laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. Piper grinned and went to do her homework, leaving Ethan standing in their small kitchen, wondering how a 9-year-old had become wiser than he'd ever been. His phone buzzed. "Tyler, how did the interview go?" Ethan replied, "Strange but necessary. How's the dojo?" "Different." "Good, different. People are actually talking to each other instead of just taking orders." Marcus stayed after class to work on technique, and instead of me telling him what he did wrong, I asked him what he thought needed work. He had really good insights. I never would have known that if I'd kept teaching the old way. That's progress. It's a start. Offer still stands if you want to help me keep making progress. Ethan stared at the message. The old fear rose up. What if he failed again? What if he taught someone wrong and they hurt someone? What if carrying the title of instructor meant betraying David's memory by profiting from the skills that killed him? But then he thought about those students sitting in a circle this morning, hungry for something better than fear-based training. He thought about Maya's thesis and Marcus's question about generating power and Tyler's genuine desire to change. He thought about how silence might keep him safe, but it also kept him from doing any good with the hard lessons he'd learned. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to use his past for something other than self-punishment. He texted back, "Let me think about it." The response came immediately. "Take all the time you need. Just know that you'd be helping a lot of people, including me." Ethan set down his phone and looked at the box of memories still sitting on his futon, no longer hidden, but not yet fully integrated into his present. He picked up the photo of him and David, 19 years old and invincible, and read David's handwriting on the back. "Brothers in the ring, friends in life. Nothing can stop us." David had been wrong about that. Death had stopped them. Guilt had stopped Ethan. Fear had stopped him from becoming the person David had believed he could be. But maybe it wasn't too late to start again. Maybe teaching didn't have to mean betraying David's memory. Maybe it could mean honoring it by ensuring other fighters learned what David had died trying to teach Ethan, that the most important battles are the ones you choose not to fight, and the strongest people are the ones who know when to use their power and when to walk away. Piper called from her room, "Dad, I need help with long division." "Coming, sweetheart." He put the photo back carefully, leaving the box open on the futon. No more hiding, no more pretending his past didn't exist. It was time to integrate who he'd been with, who he was becoming, and figure out if there was a way to be both dad and the ghost without losing himself in either identity. The answer would come. It always did. For now, there was homework to help with, dinner to make, and a daughter who needed him more than anyone needed the ghost. But for the first time in 20 years, Ethan Cross allowed himself to imagine a future where his past wasn't just something to escape. It was something to build on. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks later, and by lunchtime, Ethan's phone had received over 300 notifications. He'd silenced it after the first 50, but the buzzing continued like an insect trapped in his pocket, relentless and impossible to ignore. Sarah Winters had titled the piece, The Ghost Who Chose to Disappear, Ethan Cross and the True Cost of Victory. The article was everything she'd promised, honest, thorough, and protective of Piper's privacy. She'd woven together his fighting career, David's death, and his quiet transformation into a single father working maintenance jobs, painting a portrait that was neither heroic nor pathetic but simply human. The response was overwhelming. Sports networks wanted interviews. Podcasters reached out. A literary agent emailed about a potential memoir. 3 different gyms offered him head instructor positions with salaries that made his janitor's wage look like pocket change. And underneath all the professional inquiries were hundreds of personal messages from people sharing their own stories of loss, guilt, and choosing to start over. Ethan read exactly 3 of them before shutting off his phone completely. "That bad?" Piper asked. She was eating breakfast at their fold-out table, watching him with those observant eyes that missed nothing. "Not bad. Just a lot. People want things from me that I don't know how to give." "Like what?" "Inspiration, wisdom, some kind of proof that you can mess up really badly and still be okay." He poured himself more coffee, his 3rd cup of the morning. "The problem is, I'm not sure I'm okay. I'm just functional." "There's a difference? Being okay means you've made peace with your past. Being functional means you've learned to live with it without falling apart. One's a lot harder than the other." Piper chewed her cereal thoughtfully. "Mrs. Patterson says that being hard on yourself is just another way of being mean to someone." "Mrs. Patterson has a lot of opinions for a 4th grade teacher." "She's really wise. You'd like her." Piper pushed her bowl away. "Dad, are you going to take the teaching job at the dojo?" The question caught him off guard. He'd been avoiding Tyler's calls for days, unsure how to articulate the fear that teaching meant opening himself up to failing someone the way he'd failed David, the way he'd failed Marcus Lewis all those years ago. "I don't know yet." "Why not? You're good at explaining things. You helped me understand fractions when I thought they were impossible." "Fractions don't get hurt if I explain them wrong." "But people do get hurt if nobody teaches them the right way. Tyler was hurting people because he didn't know better. You could help him learn better." She stood, gathering her backpack with the casual wisdom that continued to floor him. "Just think about it. Also, we're out of milk, and I have a field trip on Friday, so I need $20 and a signed permission slip." She left for school, and Ethan sat in the quiet apartment surrounded by the demands of normal life. Grocery shopping, permission slips, bills, that somehow felt more overwhelming than any fight he'd ever been in. At least in the ring, the rules were clear. Outside it, everything was complicated. His phone buzzed again despite being silenced. He checked it reluctantly and found a text from Maya. "Have you seen the response to Sarah's article? People are calling it one of the most important sports pieces in years. You've started a real conversation about violence, masculinity, and accountability in combat sports." He hadn't asked to start a conversation. He just wanted to tell his story and be left alone. But apparently that wasn't how modern life worked. Tell one truth, and suddenly everyone expected you to become a spokesperson for that truth. Another text came through, this one from Tyler. "Media keeps calling the dojo asking for comments about you. I've been referring them to Sarah's article and saying you want privacy. But Ethan, you should know, enrollment is up, way up. People are coming specifically because they heard I'm changing how we teach. They want what you talked about in that circle, the wisdom part. Please consider helping me deliver it." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down like a physical force. He thought about calling Patricia Domingo, asking her to make all of this stop somehow, but lawyers couldn't undo the truth once it was public. He'd chosen to break his silence, and now he had to live with the consequences. A knock on his door interrupted the spiral of anxiety. Ethan opened it to find a man in his mid-40s standing in the hallway, wearing a suit that looked expensive and an expression that mixed nervousness with determination. "Ethan Cross? Depends on who's asking." "My name is Robert Lewis. I think you knew my son, Marcus, a long time ago in San Francisco." The name hit Ethan like a punch to the solar plexus. Marcus Lewis. The teenager he'd taught. The kid who'd put someone in the hospital using techniques Ethan had shown him. The student who represented every fear Ethan had about teaching without wisdom. "I remember Marcus," Ethan said carefully. "How is he?" "He's a physical therapist now. Married, 2 kids, good life.
but he's carried guilt about what happened when he was 17 for 25 years. Just like you've apparently carried guilt about teaching him. Robert shifted his weight. I read Sarah Winters's article, the part where you mentioned Marcus. He called me crying after he saw it, said he never knew you blamed yourself for what he did. Mr. Lewis, I'm not sure what you want me to say. I want you to hear something.
That street fight Marcus got into, the one where he hurt that other kid, it wasn't your techniques that caused it. It was the fact that he was a stupid, angry teenager who made a bad choice. You taught him how to throw a punch. You didn't teach him to use it on someone outside a controlled environment. That was his decision, his failure, not yours. I gave him weapons. You gave him skills. What he did with those skills was on him, and he knows that now. He spent decades working in rehabilitation, helping people recover from injuries, trying to make amends for the harm he caused. That's his journey, not yours. But you've been carrying his mistakes along with your own, and Marcus wanted you to know. He doesn't want you to do that anymore. He forgave himself. You should too. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, suddenly unsteady. Why are you telling me this? Because my son reads everything written about martial arts, and when he saw Sarah's article, he realized you've been punishing yourself for teaching him the same way you've been punishing yourself for David Chen's death. And he wanted you to know that the best teacher he ever had wasn't the one who taught him perfect technique. It was the one who taught him that making mistakes doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. That teacher was a physical therapist named Dr. Sarah Kim, who helped Marcus through his guilt. But it could have been you if you'd been willing to teach after what happened. Robert handed Ethan a business card with Marcus's contact information. He'd like to talk to you. No pressure, no expectations. Just one person who's lived with guilt talking to another. Think about it. He left. Ethan stood in his doorway, holding the business card and feeling the careful walls he'd built around his past starting to crumble in ways he couldn't control. His shift at Iron Will started in 2 hours. He showered, dressed, and made the drive across town with his mind churning through everything Robert Lewis had said. Was it possible he'd been carrying guilt that wasn't entirely his to carry? That he'd built an identity around being responsible for every bad outcome that touched his life, even the ones driven by other people's choices? The dojo's parking lot was full when he arrived, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Through the windows, he could see Tyler leading a class, but his teaching style had changed. Instead of barking corrections, he was moving through the students individually, offering quiet guidance and encouragement. When someone struggled with the technique, Tyler knelt down to their level, demonstrated slowly, then let them try again without judgment. Ethan watched for a few minutes, seeing the transformation that 2 weeks of intentional effort had created. The students looked relaxed, engaged, willing to make mistakes because they knew those mistakes wouldn't be punished. This was what a healthy training environment looked like. Maya appeared beside him, seemingly from nowhere. He's getting better. Still has moments where the old Tyler comes out, but he catches himself faster now. You're here a lot. I'm documenting the transformation for my thesis. Also, Tyler asked me to help develop a student code of conduct that emphasizes respect and consent. Turns out organizational psychology actually applies to martial arts. She smiled. Who knew? Did you ever finish that section on me? Finished and defended. My advisor called it the strongest case study she'd seen in her 15 years of reviewing theses. I got an A+ and a recommendation for publication in an academic journal. Maya's expression turned more serious. But beyond the academic stuff, I want you to know something. What you did. Calling out the difference between strength and wisdom, between dominance and discipline. It's rippling out. I've had people from other dojos contact me asking how they can implement similar changes. Instructors who read Sarah's article and realize they've been replicating toxic patterns without questioning them. You've started something bigger than one dojo. I didn't want to start anything. I just wanted to mop floors. Too late. You opened a door and people are walking through it. She gestured toward the training floor. Tyler's waiting for you. He has something he wants to show you. Ethan entered through the back, hanging up his jacket in the small office that doubled as storage for cleaning supplies. Tyler spotted him through the office window and called a water break, then jogged over with the energetic purpose of someone who'd discovered a new mission. Ethan, perfect timing. I want you to meet someone. He led Ethan back to the training floor where a teenage girl stood near the mirrors, maybe 16 with a purple belt and an uncertain posture that suggested she was new to this particular dojo, if not to martial arts in general. "This is Jasmine Rodriguez. Jasmine, this is Ethan Cross." "I know who he is," Jasmine said quietly. "I read the article. My mom sent it to me like 5 times. Jasmine came from another dojo across town," Tyler explained. "The instructor there, well, let's just say he makes the old me look like Mr. Rogers. She's been training for 4 years but is thinking about quitting because she's afraid of going to class." Ethan looked at Jasmine, seeing the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself small like she was trying not to take up space. He recognized that posture. He'd seen it in victims of bullying, and people who'd learned that being noticed meant being targeted. "What are you afraid of?" he asked gently. Jasmine glanced at Tyler, who nodded encouragement. "My instructor, he singles people out, makes them spar with him in front of everyone. If you're not good enough, he mocks you. If you are good enough, he tries to hurt you to teach you humility. And if you're a girl—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "He touches you when he's correcting your form. Not like assault or anything, just unnecessary. Hands on your hips, your shoulders, your lower back, always with an excuse about proper positioning, but it feels wrong." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That is wrong. That's completely inappropriate." "But he's a 5th-degree black belt. He's been teaching for 20 years. Everyone says he's one of the best instructors in Portland. So I thought maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe that's just how martial arts works." "It's not," Ethan said firmly. "Correction should never involve inappropriate touching. Instruction should never involve humiliation or intentional harm. And being a 5th-degree black belt doesn't give anyone the right to make students feel unsafe." He looked at Tyler. "Please tell me you're not sending her back there." "I'm not. She's transferring here. But she's scared. Scared to start over. Scared to trust another instructor. Scared that all martial arts environments are like the one she's leaving." Tyler's expression was earnest. "I thought maybe if you talked to her, explained what real teaching looks like, it might help." Ethan wanted to say no, wanted to finish his shift and go home and not get involved in someone else's trauma. But Jasmine was looking at him with the same expression Piper sometimes got when she was trying to be brave about something that terrified her, and he couldn't walk away from that. "Jasmine, can I ask you something? Why do you want to keep training? After 4 years of that environment, why not just quit?" She thought about it for a moment. "Because I love it. Not the fear or the humiliation, but the actual martial arts part. Learning forms, understanding how my body moves, getting stronger. It makes me feel powerful in a world that mostly makes me feel small. I don't want to give that up just because one instructor is terrible." "Then don't. But understand something. What you experienced isn't what martial arts is supposed to be. It's what martial arts becomes when ego and power corrupt the teaching. The real art is about discipline, respect, and using strength to protect people, not harm them. That's what the article said you believe. That control matters more than winning. Control is everything. It's the difference between a martial artist and a thug. A thug uses violence to dominate. A martial artist learns violence so they understand how to prevent it." Ethan paused. "Can I show you something?" She nodded. Tyler stepped back, giving them space. "Throw a punch at me, half speed, like we're just drilling." Jasmine threw a tentative jab. Ethan slipped it easily, then stepped back to his original position. "Again, but this time, really commit. Imagine I'm someone you need to defend yourself against." She threw another punch, this one with more power and intention. Ethan moved minimally, letting the punch pass inches from his face, then placed his hand gently on her extended arm. "Feel that? You're fully extended, off balance. I could counter here, here, or here." He touched spots on her body lightly. Ribs, jaw, temple. "But I'm not going to because we're training, not fighting. Your old instructor would have countered to prove dominance. He would have hurt you to teach you a lesson about overcommitting. But the real lesson is this. I saw the openings. You saw that I saw them. Now you know to keep your guard up after you punch. That's teaching. Pain isn't required." Jasmine's eyes were wide. "That's it? You just tell me what I did wrong?" "I tell you, demonstrate it slowly, let you practice until your body understands, then gradually increase speed and resistance. No humiliation required, no inappropriate touching needed, just patient instruction and mutual respect." "But what about when I mess up, because I mess up a lot?" Everyone messes up. That's how learning works. You try something, it doesn't work, you adjust and try again. The instructor's job is to help you identify what needs adjusting, not to punish you for being human. Ethan looked at Tyler. Right? Right, Tyler confirmed. And if I forget that, if I slip back into old patterns, anyone in this dojo, student or instructor, has permission to call me out. We've made it official policy. No one should be afraid to name bad teaching when they see it. Jasmine looked between them, something like hope dawning on her face. So this place is actually safe? We're working on making it safe, Tyler said. We're not perfect yet, but we're committed to trying. And if you ever feel uncomfortable or disrespected here, you tell me immediately. Not so I can make excuses, but so I can fix the problem. Okay, Jasmine smiled tentatively. Okay, I'll try it. When do classes start? Tomorrow at 4. Maya will be here. She's helping develop our curriculum, and Ethan comes in most evenings for his shift. You'll see him around. Jasmine thanked them both and left, her posture already a little straighter, her shoulders a little less hunched. Ethan watched her go and felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not quite pride, but something adjacent to it. The sense that maybe he'd helped someone avoid the kind of damage that took years to undo. Tyler waited until Jasmine was gone before speaking. Thank you. She needed to hear that from someone who isn't me. You did fine. But she trusts you. She's read about you. She knows your story. That carries weight I don't have yet. Tyler sat on one of the benches lining the wall. I've had 7 students transfer here in the last 2 weeks. All of them from the same dojo Jasmine came from. All of them with similar stories about an instructor who uses fear and humiliation as teaching tools. And I don't know how to help them unlearn that trauma while also teaching them actual martial arts. You do what you just did. You create a safe environment and give them time to trust it. But I don't know how to do that. I spent 15 years creating an unsafe environment. I know how to make people afraid of me. I don't know how to make them feel protected by me. Tyler looked at Ethan with exhausted honesty. I need help, real help, not just occasional advice when you happen to be around, but actual structured guidance on how to rebuild this place the right way. Ethan had known this conversation was coming, had felt it building since the moment Sarah's article published, and Tyler's transformation had begun attracting students fleeing toxic dojos. But knowing something was coming didn't make facing it any easier. Tyler, I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. You've lived the consequences of teaching without wisdom. You've spent 20 years learning restraint the hardest way possible. You understand trauma because you carry it. Tyler's voice held quiet desperation. These students need someone who knows what it's like to be broken and have to rebuild yourself. That's not me. I'm just figuring out I was broken in the first place, but it is you. What about my job? My daughter? My life outside this place? Keep all of it. I'm not asking you to quit being a janitor or stop being a dad. I'm asking you to spend 3 hours a week teaching a class focused on ethics, discipline, and the philosophical foundations of martial arts. The stuff that should come before technique, but almost never does. I'll pay you consultant rates, $50 an hour, more if you'll take it. $50 an hour. That was 3 times what he made mopping floors, and for work that wouldn't destroy his knees or leave him smelling like industrial cleaner. It would mean Piper's medical bills got paid on time. It would mean saying yes to the occasional field trip or school fundraiser without checking his bank account first. It would mean financial breathing room he hadn't had in years. But it also meant stepping back into the world he'd fled, meant putting himself in a position of authority over people who'd look to him for guidance, meant risking failure in ways that could hurt someone beyond repair. I need to think about it, Ethan said. Again. He'd been saying that for 2 weeks, but the answer never got clearer. Fair enough? Just know the offer stands as long as you need. Tyler stood, preparing to return to his class. By the way, Marcus Lewis called, the guy you mentioned in Sarah's article. He wants to talk to you. His father already came by my apartment. Then you know Marcus doesn't blame you. Maybe it's time to stop blaming yourself. Tyler walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and a mop bucket that suddenly felt like an anchor instead of a refuge. He spent the rest of his shift cleaning mechanically, his mind elsewhere, wrestling with the question of whether accepting Tyler's offer meant honoring David's memory or betraying it. By the time he finished, the dojo was empty except for Maya, who was typing notes on her laptop in the corner. She looked up when he started closing the blinds. "You're still thinking about it," she said. "Not a question." "Yeah. Can I tell you something from my research, from interviewing dozens of students who've experienced abusive coaching?" She closed her laptop. The people who suffered the most weren't the ones whose coaches were just incompetent. They were the ones whose coaches had real skill but no wisdom to guide it. Those coaches created students who could fight but didn't know when to stop, who won tournaments but lost themselves, who were technically excellent but ethically empty. That's what I'm afraid of becoming. But you're not empty. You're full of hard-won wisdom that most people never acquire because they never have to face real consequences. You killed your best friend and spent 20 years learning from it. That's tragic, but it's also incredibly valuable if you're willing to share it. Sharing trauma isn't teaching. No, but sharing what you learned from trauma is. And that's what these students need. Someone who can say, "I know what happens when power goes unchecked because I lived it, and here's how we prevent it from happening to you." Maya's eyes held fierce certainty. "Ethan, you're not David's killer who happens to know martial arts. You're a teacher who learned the hardest possible lesson about responsibility. That makes you exactly the right person to teach the next generation." Ethan wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe because she was right. Maybe because he was tired of running. Maybe because Piper's voice echoed in his head saying, "People get hurt if nobody teaches them the right way," and he'd seen enough people hurt by bad teaching to know his daughter was wiser than he'd given her credit for. "If I do this," he said slowly, "I have conditions." Maya's face lit up. "Name them." "I'm not teaching technique. Tyler's got that covered. I teach philosophy, ethics, when to use force and when to walk away. The mental and moral foundations that should underpin physical training." Perfect. "I don't promote students. I don't grade tests. I'm not part of the belt hierarchy. I'm there to teach wisdom, not gatekeep progress. Even better. And if I see anyone, student or instructor, replicating the toxic patterns I'm trying to undo, I call it out publicly and immediately. No protecting egos, no political considerations, honesty over comfort. Tyler will agree to that. He's already implemented a policy where anyone can call out bad behavior without consequences. Ethan took a deep breath. "Then tell Tyler I'll do it. 3 hours a week, $50 an hour, focused on building ethical martial artists instead of just effective fighters." Maya actually squealed and hugged him, which was so unexpected that Ethan stood there awkwardly for a moment before patting her back. She pulled away, grinning. "This is going to change everything. You're going to change everything." "I'm just going to teach a class, Maya. Let's not get carried away." "You're going to teach a class that other dojos will hear about and want to replicate. You're going to create a model for ethical martial arts instruction that could spread across Portland, then across the country. You're going to prove that it's possible to train fighters who are also good people. That's not nothing, Ethan. That's revolutionary." He wanted to tell her she was being dramatic, but before he could, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Ethan Cross?" A woman's voice, older with a slight accent he couldn't place. "Speaking." "My name is Lin Chen. I was David's mother." The world tilted. Ethan sat down heavily on the nearest bench, his hand gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. "Mrs. Chen, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I'm calling because I read Sarah Winters' article. I saw what you've been carrying for 20 years. Her voice was gentle, but firm. "Ethan, my husband and I never blamed you for David's death. We told you that at the funeral. We meant it then, and we mean it now." "But I killed him." "You were involved in an accident that killed him." "There's a difference. David knew the risks of training. He accepted them because he loved martial arts, and he loved you like a brother. What happened was tragic, but it wasn't murder. It wasn't even negligence. It was two fighters doing what fighters do, and something went terribly wrong." Ethan couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down his face, and Maya had quietly moved to the other side of the room to give him privacy. "My son would not want you to spend your whole life punishing yourself," Lynn continued. He believed martial arts should make people better, not just stronger. He believed the best fighters were the ones who knew when not to fight. And he believed you embodied those principles better than anyone he'd ever met. That's why he stayed by your side through every match, every training session, because he was proud of you. I'm so sorry, Ethan managed. I'm so sorry I took him from you. You didn't take him. The universe did. And while we've missed him every day for 20 years, we've also watched you from a distance, through mutual friends, through the grapevine, and we've seen you honor his memory by becoming a good father, an honest man, someone who chose peace over violence. That's what David would have wanted. Not fame or championships, just for you to be okay. I don't feel okay. Maybe you will someday. But Ethan, there's a reason I'm calling now after reading that article. I want you to teach again. I want you to pass on what David believed in, that martial arts should build character, not destroy it. Can you do that? For him? The question hung in the air. Ethan thought about Jasmine, afraid but determined, about Tyler, trying to change, about Marcus Lewis carrying guilt that wasn't his to carry, about all the students who needed someone to show them that strength and wisdom weren't opposites but partners. I'll try, he said. I just agreed to teach a class focused on ethics and discipline. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I'll try. That's all any of us can do, try and forgive ourselves when we fall short. Lynn's voice softened. David loved you, Ethan. He wouldn't want you to spend forever mourning him. He'd want you to live well and help others live well, too. That's how you honor him. Not by hiding, but by teaching what he died believing in. They talked for a few more minutes, Lynn sharing memories of David that Ethan had never heard, stories from before they'd met and after they'd become inseparable. When they finally hung up, Ethan sat in the empty dojo holding his phone and feeling like some enormous weight had been lifted from his chest. Not gone completely, but lighter, more manageable. Maya returned quietly. That sounded important. It was. That was David's mother. She gave me permission to stop punishing myself. Did it work? I don't know yet, but it helped. Ethan stood, steadier than he'd felt in years. I need to go home. I need to tell Piper about the teaching job. She'll want to know. She'll be proud of you. Maybe. Or maybe she'll worry that I'm going back to being the ghost instead of being her dad. Then you tell her the truth, that you're not going back to anything. You're moving forward into something new, someone who's both the ghost and her dad, who uses his past to build a better future. Maya smiled. That's not a contradiction, Ethan. That's integration. That's healing. He drove home through evening traffic, Portland's lights reflecting off wet streets in patterns that looked almost beautiful. When he arrived at the apartment, Piper was at the table doing homework, and the ordinariness of it made his throat tight. Hey, sweetheart. Hey, Dad. You look different. Different how? That's sad. Like maybe you figured something out. He sat across from her, took a breath, and told her about Tyler's offer, about teaching ethics and discipline, about Lin Chen's phone call and permission he hadn't known he needed. Piper listened without interrupting, her face serious and thoughtful. When he finished, she said, So you're going to teach people how to not be like you were when you accidentally hurt David? The bluntness of it stole his breath, but she wasn't being cruel, just direct in the way children are when they cut through complexity to find simple truth. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Good. Because David sounds like he was a really good person, and good people deserve to have their ideas taught to other people. She returned to her homework. Also, $50 an hour is way better than mopping floors, so maybe we can get the premium mac and cheese instead of the regular kind. Ethan laughed, really laughed, for the second time in as many weeks. Premium mac and cheese? That's your big dream? I'm 9. My dreams are appropriately scaled. She grinned at him. But seriously, Dad, I'm proud of you for trying something scary, for not hiding anymore. When did you get so wise? I've been working on it gradually. You've just been too busy being sad to notice. Yeah, I've heard that one before. He ruffled her hair and she swatted his hand away but smiled. I love you, Piper. Love you too, Dad. Now can you help me with this social studies project? I have to write about someone brave, and I think I'm going to write about you. I'm not brave. I've spent 20 years hiding.
You spent 20 years healing, and now you're going to help other people heal. That's the bravest thing I can think of.
Ethan helped her with the project and made dinner and followed their routine because routine was still the backbone of everything good in his life. But underneath the routine was something new. Not quite hope, not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of both. The sense that he could carry his past without being crushed by it, that he could honor David's memory by teaching what David had believed in, that being the ghost and being dad weren't contradictions but two parts of the same complicated person, finally learning to coexist. That night, after Piper was asleep, Ethan took the box from his futon and began putting items away, not hiding them, just giving them a place that wasn't the center of his daily life. He kept out the photo of him and David at 19, the one with David's handwriting on the back, and set it on the milk crate nightstand where he could see it every morning. "I'm going to try," he said to the photo, to David's memory, to whatever part of his friend might still exist somewhere in the universe. "I'm going to teach what you believed in. I'm probably going to screw it up sometimes, but I'm going to try. That's the best I can do." The photo didn't answer, but Ethan felt something shift anyway. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first steps toward forgiving himself. And that was enough for one night. Enough to sleep without nightmares, without waking at 3 a.m. drowning in guilt, without carrying the full weight of David's death on his shoulders alone. Tomorrow he'd call Tyler and accept the teaching position officially. Tomorrow he'd figure out what a class on ethics and discipline actually looked like. Tomorrow he'd start the next chapter of a life that had been stuck in one place for 20 years. But tonight, he was just Ethan Cross, father, janitor, former champion, future teacher, and finally, after 2 decades of running, someone ready to stand still and face whatever came next. 3 months passed before Ethan realized he'd stopped counting days since David's death and started counting days since he'd begun teaching again. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, like watching seasons change. You didn't notice the exact moment summer became fall, but suddenly the leaves were different colors and the air smelled like transformation. His Thursday evening ethics class had grown from 12 nervous students to nearly 40 people who packed into Iron Will's training floor, sitting cross-legged on mats while Ethan talked about discipline, restraint, and the difference between being dangerous and being violent. He never demonstrated techniques, never sparred for the cameras that students occasionally tried to sneak in. He just talked, answered questions, and shared stories about what happened when power went unchecked and ego replaced wisdom. Tyler sat in on every class, taking notes like a graduate student, implementing changes based on what Ethan taught. The transformation was remarkable. Students who'd been training at Iron Will for years said the atmosphere had completely changed. Less fear, more respect, actual learning instead of just performance. But the real measure of change came on a cold November evening when Ethan arrived for his regular shift to find Tyler sitting in the office with his head in his hands and Marcus from the original Thursday night class standing awkwardly by the door. "What happened?" Ethan asked, setting down his mop bucket. Tyler looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I screwed up. I reverted to old patterns and Marcus called me out on it, in front of the whole intermediate class." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I know I should have talked to Tyler privately first, but in the moment—" "No," Ethan interrupted. If Tyler was doing something harmful, calling it out publicly was exactly right. That's the policy we established. "What did he do?" "Student named Chris. He's been struggling with his forms. Keeps making the same mistakes. Today Tyler got frustrated and said, 'My grandmother could do better, and she's dead.'" Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. It was the kind of comment the old Tyler would have made without thinking, the kind that humiliates someone for struggling. "And I remembered what you said about how teaching should never involve making people feel small, so I spoke up." Ethan looked at Tyler, who wouldn't meet his eyes. "You told the whole class I was wrong," Tyler said. "You undermined my authority as head instructor." "I called out harmful behavior," Marcus corrected. "Like you said we should, like Ethan taught us to." "And then what happened?" Ethan asked. "Then the whole class had a discussion about it. Chris said he'd been thinking about quitting because he felt like he wasn't good enough. 3 other students admitted they'd felt the same way at different times, and Tyler apologized." Marcus paused. But he's been in here ever since, saying he's a failure who'll never change. Ethan pulled up a chair and sat facing Tyler. You made a mistake. You fell into an old pattern. That doesn't mean you're a failure, it means you're human. But I've been working so hard. 3 months of trying to be better, and it took one frustrating moment for me to revert to being the instructor I promised I'd stop being. Tyler, change isn't linear. You don't just decide to be better and then never mess up again. You decide to be better, you work at it, you stumble, you get back up and keep working. That's the process. The fact that Marcus felt safe enough to call you out and you apologized instead of doubling down, that's growth. The old you would have kicked Marcus out of the dojo for questioning your authority. The old me was stronger, more confident. The old you was arrogant and harmful. Don't romanticize him just because change is uncomfortable. Ethan leaned forward. You know what I did 2 weeks ago? I was helping Piper with homework and she made the same math mistake 3 times in a row. I snapped at her, said she wasn't paying attention, made her feel stupid for something her brain just wasn't processing yet. And you know what she did? What? She said, Dad, you're being mean. That's not how good teachers act. And she was right. I was frustrated and tired, and I took it out on her using the exact patterns I teach people to avoid. Ethan shook his head. I apologized. We talked about it. I helped her with the math problem using patience instead of frustration. But the point is, I'm teaching ethics to 40 people, and I still mess up with my own daughter. That doesn't make me a fraud. It makes me someone who's still learning. Tyler finally looked up. How do you live with it? Knowing you might fail again? I don't live with certainty. I live with commitment. I'm committed to trying, to catching myself when I fall into old patterns, to apologizing when I hurt someone, and to doing better the next time. That's all any of us can do. Marcus spoke from the doorway. For what it's worth, Mr. Kane, the fact that you apologized in front of everyone meant a lot. Chris stayed after class and said he's not quitting. He said if his instructor can admit mistakes, then making mistakes must be okay. He really said that? Tyler's voice was rough with emotion. Word for word, you taught him something important today, not about martial arts, but about being human. That's what Ethan's been trying to tell us. The technique is just the vehicle. The real lesson is character. After Marcus left, Tyler and Ethan sat in the small office while the dojo filled with students for the evening's advanced class. Through the window, they could see Maya leading warm-ups with an ease that suggested she was becoming an instructor herself, though she still insisted she was just there for research. I want to show you something, Tyler said. He pulled out his phone and opened a message thread. I got this email yesterday from the Regional Martial Arts Association. They're asking if I'd be willing to speak at their annual conference about transforming dojo culture. They specifically mentioned your ethics class and the changes we've made here. That's great. You should do it. I want you to do it with me, or instead of me. You're the one with the actual wisdom. Tyler, this is your dojo, your transformation. You need to own it, not hide behind me. I'm not trying to hide. I'm trying to be honest. The changes here happened because of what you taught me. Standing up there and taking credit would be dishonest. Ethan considered this. Then we do it together. You talk about the practical implementation, how you changed your teaching methods, what policies you put in place, how you handled resistance from students who liked the old way. I'll talk about the philosophical foundation, why those changes matter, what healthy power dynamics look like, how to teach violence responsibly. Tyler's face brightened. You'd really do that? On one condition. We make it clear that this isn't about me. I'm not the ghost giving a motivational speech. I'm just someone who learned hard lessons and is trying to help others avoid learning them the same way. Deal. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion on the training floor. Ethan and Tyler rushed out to find 2 students chest to chest, voices raised, fingers pointing. Maya was trying to de-escalate, but both men were too angry to hear her. He called me a coward, one of them shouted. Said I backed down from sparring because I'm weak. You did back down, the other shot back. You said you weren't ready, but everyone knows you're just scared. Ethan stepped between them before Tyler could. His voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Both of you, sit down, now. Something in his tone made them comply immediately. The rest of the class had stopped to watch, forming an unconscious circle around the conflict. "What's your name?" Ethan asked the first student. "Jason. And you?" "Kevin." "All right, Jason and Kevin, here's what's going to happen. You're going to explain what happened one at a time without interrupting each other. Jason first." Jason explained that he'd declined a sparring match because his shoulder had been bothering him and he didn't want to aggravate an old injury. Kevin, apparently frustrated by what he perceived as weakness, had pushed the issue and made comments about Jason being afraid. "Kevin," Ethan said when Jason finished, "why does it matter to you whether Jason spars or not? Because we're supposed to push ourselves, test our limits, not make excuses." "Who told you that saying, 'I'm not ready' is making excuses?" Kevin faltered. That's how martial arts works. You push through discomfort. There's a difference between productive discomfort and injury. Between pushing limits and ignoring your body's signals that something's wrong. Jason chose to protect himself from potential harm. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Ethan turned to Jason. "Did you explain about your shoulder?" "I tried to, but Kevin said real fighters train through pain. Real fighters also retire early with chronic injuries because they train through pain instead of recovering properly." Ethan looked at Kevin hard. "Let me ask you something. If you forced Jason to spar and his shoulder gave out during the match, and he needed surgery that put him out of training for 6 months, would that make either of you better martial artists?" "No, but would it prove anything except that pride is more important to you than your training partner's well-being?" Kevin's face flushed. "I wasn't trying to hurt him. But you were trying to shame him into ignoring his body's limits. And shame is a terrible teacher. It doesn't make people stronger. It makes them reckless. And recklessness gets people injured or killed." The dojo was silent. Ethan could feel everyone listening, absorbing not just what he said, but how he said it. With firmness, but not anger. With authority, but not cruelty. "Here's what you both need to understand," Ethan continued. "Consent matters in training. If someone says they're not ready or not comfortable with an exercise, that's the end of the discussion. You don't pressure them. You don't mock them. You respect their boundary and find another training partner. Because the moment you stop respecting boundaries is the moment martial arts becomes abuse." "I'm sorry," Kevin said quietly. "Jason, I'm sorry. I was out of line." Jason nodded, rubbing his shoulder. "It's okay. I should have been clear about the injury." "No," Ethan corrected. "Saying I'm not ready should be enough. You don't owe anyone a detailed medical history to justify protecting yourself." Tyler stepped forward, his instructor voice returning. "Kevin, you're sitting out the rest of tonight's class, not as punishment, but to observe. Watch how other students respect each other's boundaries. See what healthy training partnerships look like. Then we'll talk about whether you're ready to come back." Kevin looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. He moved to the benches, and the class resumed with an energy that felt more focused, more aware of the lines between pushing hard and pushing harmfully. After class, Maya found Ethan in the office. "That was masterful. The way you de-escalated without diminishing either person. The way you made it about principles instead of personalities." "I was terrified the whole time." "Really? You seemed completely calm." "That's 20 years of practice controlling my external reactions while my internal ones are screaming. I kept thinking, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I make it worse? What if Kevin storms out and tells everyone I'm a terrible teacher? But you didn't say the wrong thing. You said exactly the right thing. And both of those students learned something crucial about respect and boundaries." Maya closed her laptop. "Ethan, do you know what's remarkable about your teaching?" "What?" "You never pretend to have all the answers. You share your doubts, your fears, your ongoing struggles. That makes you trustworthy in a way that false confidence never could. Students don't need perfect teachers. They need honest ones." "Maya, can I ask you something? Your thesis is done. You got your degree. Why are you still here?" She smiled. "Because watching this dojo transform isn't just academic research anymore. It's hope. Every time I see Tyler catch himself before making a harmful comment, every time I watch students respectfully decline sparring and have that respected, every time someone like Kevin gets corrected and actually learns from it, I'm watching proof that change is possible. And I want to document it, share it, Help it spread to other dojos. This could be a model for the entire martial arts community. That's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of potential. There's a difference. Over the following weeks, word continued to spread. The regional conference invitation turned into a request for Ethan and Tyler to lead a full-day workshop. A journalist from a national sports network wanted to do a follow-up to Sarah's article. And most surprisingly, the instructor from Jasmine's old dojo, the one she'd fled because of inappropriate touching and fear-based teaching, showed up one Thursday evening asking to observe Ethan's ethics class. His name was Richard Santos, and he looked exactly like what Ethan expected. Late 50s, thick with muscle gone slightly soft, wearing his 5th-degree black belt like armor. He sat in the back of the class, arms crossed, expression skeptical. Ethan taught that evening's class on the concept of power dynamics in instruction, talking about how the belt hierarchy could either foster growth or enable abuse depending on how instructors wielded their authority. He didn't mention Richard specifically, but everyone in the room knew who the lesson was aimed at. After class, Richard approached Ethan while students filtered out. "Can we talk?" "Depends on what you want to talk about." "I've lost 23 students in the past 4 months. Most of them transferred here, and I need to understand why." Richard's voice held more confusion than anger. "I've been teaching for 30 years. I've produced champions. I've built a successful business. But suddenly, I'm the villain, and you're the hero, and I don't understand what I did wrong." Ethan gestured to the benches. They sat, and for a long moment, Ethan studied the man who'd made Jasmine afraid to go to class, who'd touched students inappropriately under the guise of correction, who'd used fear as a motivator. "Do you really not know?" Ethan finally asked. "I know students are soft now, too sensitive, can't handle real training." "That's not it." "Then what?" "You confused toughness with cruelty. You thought making people afraid of you made you a good teacher, and you used your position to touch students, especially female students, in ways that made them uncomfortable." Richard's face hardened. Those touches were instructional, correcting posture, adjusting form." "Jasmine Rodriguez told me you put your hands on her hips and lower back unnecessarily. Other students have said similar things. That's not instruction. That's using your authority to invade personal space under the cover of teaching." "So one teenage girl complains and suddenly I'm a predator?" "It's not one girl. It's a pattern of behavior that's been documented by multiple students over years. And whether you meant it inappropriately or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you made people feel unsafe, and unsafe students can't learn." Richard stood abruptly. "I came here hoping for professional courtesy, instructor to instructor. Instead, you're accusing me of being some kind of abuser based on the word of students who couldn't handle rigorous training." "Sit down," Ethan said quietly. The command in his voice made Richard pause. "You came here because you're losing students in revenue, and you want to understand why. I'm telling you. The question is whether you're willing to hear it." Slowly, Richard sat back down. "I'm not saying you're a predator," Ethan continued. "I'm saying your teaching methods created an environment where students felt uncomfortable, disrespected, and afraid. Some of that was your tone, your comments, your use of humiliation. Some of it was physical boundaries you crossed without considering how they'd be received. And all of it added up to a culture where students came to class dreading the experience instead of looking forward to it. Martial arts is supposed to be challenging. Challenging doesn't mean traumatizing. You can push students without breaking them. You can correct mistakes without humiliation. You can adjust someone's form without making them feel violated. But all of that requires you to care more about their growth than your ego." Richard was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, more vulnerable. "How do I fix it?" "You start by admitting you caused harm, not defending it, not explaining it, just acknowledging it. You apologize to the students you hurt, not because you think you'll get them back, but because they deserve to hear it. And then you do the hard work of examining every aspect of how you teach and asking yourself if it's helping students or helping your ego. Will any of them come back? I don't know. Some might if they see genuine change. Others are better off here, where they feel safe. But this isn't about getting students back. It's about becoming the instructor you should have been all along." Richard looked at his hands, weathered from decades of training. I built my whole identity on being tough, on not coddling students, on producing fighters who could handle anything. And you're saying that was wrong? I'm saying toughness without compassion creates broken people, not strong ones. I'm saying you can demand excellence without demanding fear. And I'm saying the strongest thing you can do right now is admit you need to change. Like Tyler Kane did. Tyler's transformation has been public and painful. He's had to face his mistakes in front of everyone, apologize repeatedly, and rebuild from the ground up. But his dojo is thriving now. Students actually want to be here, and he sleeps better at night knowing he's not causing harm. Richard stood again, this time with less anger and more exhaustion. I need to think about this. Take your time. But while you're thinking, stop teaching. Stop training students until you're sure you can do it without causing the kind of damage that's driven 23 people away from your dojo. If I stop teaching, I lose my business. If you keep teaching the way you have been, you lose your soul. Choose which matters more. Richard left without another word. Ethan watched him go and felt no satisfaction, only a weary sadness that someone could spend 30 years in martial arts and never learn its most important lesson, that the greatest strength is knowing when to yield. Tyler had been listening from the office. He came out once Richard was gone. Do you think he'll change? I don't know. Some people are so invested in their identity that they can't imagine being anyone else. But I gave him the truth. What he does with it is up to him. What you said about stopping teaching until you're sure you won't cause harm. Tyler paused. I stopped teaching for 2 weeks after Marcus called me out. Did you know that? I didn't. I was too scared I'd mess up again, too worried I'd hurt someone. You convinced me to come back by saying the work of being better never ends, but I had to be willing to show up for that work. Tyler's voice was thoughtful. Richard's at that crossroads now. The question is whether he'll choose growth or defensiveness. Either way, we keep building what we're building here, showing that there's a better way. The workshop at the regional conference happened on a Saturday in early December. Ethan had been dreading it for weeks, but Piper had been so excited about him being a real teacher that her enthusiasm had been contagious. She'd even helped him practice his presentation, sitting at their kitchen table and asking questions like, "But why does discipline matter?" And "What if someone doesn't want to learn?" The conference was held at a hotel convention center, and the workshop room was packed with instructors from across Oregon and Washington. Some looked skeptical. Others looked hopeful. All of them looked tired in the way that people who work with humans in crisis always look tired. Tyler spoke first, laying out the concrete changes he'd implemented. The policy allowing anyone to call out harmful behavior, the emphasis on consent and sparring, the shift from humiliation-based correction to constructive feedback. He was honest about his failures, about the times he'd reverted to old patterns and had to be corrected by students like Marcus. Then Ethan took the microphone, and for a moment he was back in the ring, heart pounding, mouth dry, uncertain if he could deliver what was needed. But then he saw Maya in the third row, taking notes and giving him an encouraging smile. He saw Piper in the back, sitting with Patricia Domingo, who'd insisted on coming to support him. And he saw all those instructors looking at him with desperate hope that there was a way to do this work without destroying themselves or their students. "My name is Ethan Cross," he began. 20 years ago, I killed my best friend during a training accident. That's not metaphor or exaggeration. I threw a punch that ended his life. And I've spent 2 decades learning what happens when you teach technique without wisdom, when you prioritize winning over safety, when you forget that the people you're training are human beings with limits that should be respected. The room was silent. Ethan continued, sharing David's story, his own collapse, his years of running. He talked about finding Tyler's dojo and being forced to confront his past. He talked about the difference between strength and cruelty, between discipline and abuse, between teaching and dominating. The hardest thing about teaching martial arts responsibly, he said, is accepting that you're teaching people how to hurt others. That's the fundamental reality. Every punch, every kick, every submission hold, they're tools for causing harm. And if we don't teach when and why to use those tools, we're just creating weapons without safety mechanisms. We're training people who can fight but don't know when not to. An instructor raised her hand. But isn't that what competition is about? Fighting when you're told to fight? Competition has rules, weight classes, referees, and medical staff. Street violence has none of those things. And if we train students to only understand fighting in controlled environments, we fail them when they face real-world situations where the right answer might be to walk away, de-escalate, or defend just enough to escape. Another hand went up. How do you teach that? How do you train people to be capable but restrained? You model it. You demonstrate it. You create a culture where using minimum necessary force is praised, where de-escalation is seen as strength, where admitting you're not ready for something is respected rather than mocked. And most importantly, you examine your own relationship with power. Do you use your authority to build students up or tear them down? Do you teach because you love helping people grow or because you love feeling dominant? Those questions determine everything about your teaching. The workshop continued for 3 hours. Instructors shared their own struggles with toxic culture, their attempts to change, their fears of losing students if they stopped being harsh. Ethan and Tyler answered questions, offered frameworks, and most importantly, acknowledged that there were no perfect solutions, only commitment to doing better. Near the end, an older instructor stood up. Ethan recognized him immediately, Richard Santos. "I'm the instructor Ethan mentioned," Richard said, his voice steady but strained. "The one who lost 23 students, the one who made people feel unsafe, and I came here to say something I should have said weeks ago." He turned to face Ethan directly. "You were right. About everything. I spent 30 years confusing fear with respect, cruelty with toughness, and I drove away good students because I cared more about my ego than their well-being." He addressed the room. "I've closed my dojo temporarily. I'm going through training on appropriate boundaries, consent-based instruction, and trauma-informed teaching. I'm not asking for forgiveness or redemption. I just want other instructors to know, if you recognize yourself in what Ethan and Tyler are describing, change before you lose everything that matters." The room erupted in applause. Richard sat down looking like he might cry. And Ethan felt something shift in his chest, not quite healing, but maybe the first real step toward it. David would have liked Richard's honesty, would have appreciated the courage it took to admit failure publicly. After the workshop, people swarmed Ethan and Tyler with questions, business cards, requests for consultations. Maya was already talking to a group of female instructors about developing a network for addressing gender-specific issues in martial arts training. Patricia was negotiating speaking fees for future workshops, and Piper was eating cookies from the refreshment table, completely unbothered by the chaos her father had created. "You did good, Dad," she said when he finally extracted himself from the crowd. "Everyone was really listening." "Thanks, sweetheart." "I was terrified." "I know, but you did it anyway. That's what brave means." They drove home through Portland's winter rain, past the dojo where Ethan still mopped floors 3 nights a week. Not because he had to anymore, but because the routine grounded him. Past Piper's school, where she'd written an essay about her father being her hero, which had made him cry when he read it. Past all the ordinary places that made up their ordinary life, that was somehow becoming extraordinary without either of them quite noticing how. That night, after Piper was asleep, Ethan sat with the photo of him and David, reading the handwriting on the back for the 1,000th time. "Brothers in the ring, friends in life. Nothing can stop us." "Something did stop us," Ethan said quietly to the photo. "But maybe you were right about the rest of it. Maybe we're still brothers, still friends, just in a different way now. Me teaching what you believed in. You watching from wherever you are. That's its own kind of unstoppable, right?" The photo didn't answer, but for the first time in 20 years, Ethan didn't need it to. He'd found his own answer by living it, by choosing to honor David not through eternal grief, but through teaching others the lessons David had died believing in. 3 months later, on a Tuesday evening in March, Ethan's ethics class had grown so large that Tyler had moved it to the biggest training space and started live streaming it for instructors who couldn't attend in person. 50 people sat on mats, listening as Ethan talked about the relationship between physical power and moral responsibility. In the second row sat Marcus Lewis, the student he'd taught decades ago, and blamed himself for failing. They'd met for coffee twice, working through old guilt together, learning that forgiveness was more complicated than either of them had expected, but also more possible. In the third row sat Jasmine Rodriguez, now helping teach beginner classes and talking openly about her experience with Richard's toxic dojo. She'd become an advocate for consent-based training, and several martial arts organizations had already invited her to speak at their events. In the back sat Tyler Kane, no longer head instructor in the traditional sense, but a collaborator, someone who'd learned that real authority came from service rather than dominance. His dojos were thriving. His Instagram had shifted from ego-driven content to thoughtful discussions of martial arts philosophy. He'd become what his grandfather had always hoped he'd be. And standing in the doorway, watching quietly, was Lin Chen. David's mother had come to Portland specifically to see what Ethan was teaching, to witness how her son's beliefs had survived his death and were now spreading to a new generation of martial artists. After class, she approached Ethan with tears in her eyes. "David would be so proud of you." "I hope so. I'm trying to honor him." "You are. Not by being perfect, but by being real. By sharing your failures so others can avoid them. By teaching that strength means knowing when not to fight." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for giving me this. For showing me that David's death wasn't meaningless, that something good came from all that pain." "I'm still learning how to believe that," Ethan admitted. "Then keep learning, keep teaching, keep showing people that it's possible to carry grief and still build something beautiful." She smiled through her tears. "That's what David would have wanted, not for you to be happy, though I hope you find that too, but for you to be useful, to take what you learned and make the world a little better." She left, and Ethan stood in the empty dojo, surrounded by the evidence of transformation. Tyler's business cards featuring his new mission statement about character-based martial arts. Maya's thesis outline posted on the bulletin board along with information about her upcoming book on ethical combat sports instruction. Photos of students at various belt levels, all smiling, none looking afraid. His phone buzzed. A text from Piper. "Mrs. Patterson says I can bring you for career day if you want to come talk about being a teacher. Also, we need milk again. Also, I love you." Ethan smiled and typed back, "I'll come to career day. And I love you too, sweetheart. See you soon." He finished locking up the dojo, stepping out into a Portland evening that smelled like rain and possibility. His car was parked in the same spot it always was, but somehow the drive home felt different tonight, less like escape and more like return, less like running from who he'd been and more like moving toward who he was becoming. At home, he found Piper waiting with homework spread across the kitchen table and questions about everything from fractions to philosophy. They worked through problems together, ordered takeout from the Thai place she loved, and fell into the comfortable rhythm of their life that was somehow both ordinary and miraculous. Later, after she was asleep, Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages from the workshop attendees, instructors implementing new policies, students reporting feeling safer in their training environments, Richard Santos sending progress reports on his own transformation, including the news that 3 of his former students had agreed to return once he completed his training on appropriate boundaries. The last message was from Tyler. "Thank you for not giving up on me, or yourself, or any of us. What you've built here, what we've built together, it matters. It's spreading. You're changing the martial arts world one honest conversation at a time." Ethan started to type a response, then stopped. Words felt inadequate for what he wanted to say. That Tyler had saved him as much as he'd saved Tyler. That teaching had given him a purpose beyond grief. That building something good from something terrible was the only redemption he'd ever really needed. Instead, he just wrote, "We're all still learning, but we're learning together. That's what matters." He set down his phone and looked at the photo on his nightstand. David at 19, eternally young, eternally hopeful, eternally believing that martial arts could make people better. And for the first time in 20 years, Ethan looked at that photo and didn't feel crushing guilt. He felt gratitude for the time they'd had, for the lessons David had taught him, for the wisdom that had survived tragedy and was now spreading to people who'd never met David but were learning what he'd believed anyway. "We did it," Ethan whispered to the photo. "Not the way we planned, not in the timeline we imagined, but we built something good, something that helps people, and I hope, that's enough." Somewhere in the apartment, Piper's nebulizer hummed softly. Outside, Portland's rain tapped against windows. And inside Ethan Cross, former champion, current teacher, eternal student of how to live with loss and still choose hope, something that had been frozen for 2 decades finally thawed. He wasn't the ghost anymore. He wasn't just Dad. He wasn't defined by his worst moment or limited by his greatest fear. He was simply Ethan, flawed and striving, damaged and healing, carrying his past while building his future, teaching others the hardest lessons he'd learned himself. And that, he realized as sleep finally claimed him, was exactly who he needed to be. The story didn't end with redemption or triumph or any neat resolution. It ended with a man choosing to show up day after day, doing the difficult work of being better than he was yesterday. It ended with a dojo transformed from a place of fear to a place of growth. It ended with students learning that real strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up with honesty and continuing the work anyway. But most importantly, it ended with Ethan Cross finally understanding what David had known all along, that the most important battles are fought not in rings or cages, but in the daily choice to use power responsibly, to teach with wisdom rather than ego, and to honor those we've lost by becoming the people they believed we could be. The janitor had taught the black belt a lesson, but in doing so, he'd taught himself something even more valuable, that you could carry grief without being consumed by it, that you could acknowledge failure without being defined by it, and that 20 years of running could end the moment you decided to stand still and face what you'd been fleeing. David Chen's death had been a tragedy, but the life Ethan built afterward, the students he mentored, the culture he helped transform, the father he became to a wise 9-year-old girl who called him her champion, that was David's legacy living on through someone who'd finally learned to forgive himself. And in the end, maybe that was the only victory that mattered.